Chapter 159. It's another chapter of nearly 6,000 words, so I'm a little late. The early summer was long. When he hung up the video call, the light of dawn was already blooming on the horizon. The morning sun had just risen. The cold morning light sprinkled on the water where the river and the sea met, falling on every corner of the Sky Academy. The Special Warfare Academy, which was full of an iron-blooded atmosphere, was half hidden by lush plants. Standing on the top floor of the dormitory building, one could see that the entire Sky Academy was less solemn and cold than it used to be, and more tranquil. June 15th. The day of the final battle. The entire Sky Academy and the entire Dark World were waiting for the result of this battle. In the vast Dark World, the superiors of the Invincible Realm were far from numerous, but they were not rare either. There were 30 superiors of the Invincible Realm on the Divine and Holy lists, and there were also individuals like Gu Qianquan who had not been on the list. There were dozens of superiors of the Invincible Realm among the nearly 7 billion people in the world, which was a pitifully small number. And even the superiors of the Invincible Realm were divided into the strong and the weak. The gap between the first place on the Divine list and the last place on the Holy list could also be jaw-dropping. On the Divine list, which represented the peak combat capability of the Dark World, those who could rank in the top 5 were well-deserved gods for this era. For example, the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong. For example, the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, Ars. Another example was Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, who ranked 4th on the Divine list. The list of the Divine and Holy lists was updated every 10 years. Every ranking, every change, rise or fall, was a major event that could affect the pattern of the Dark World. The list of individual advancement and retreat represented whether a super trend was compromising or radical on a series of things, and even related to the rise and fall and survival of a super force. This was the fight at the peak of the entire Dark World, and it was a terrifying deterrent that only belonged to the superiors of the Invincible Realm. Anything in the Dark World, as long as it was related to the superiors of the Divine list, would attract more attention than the war between some small countries. And it was inevitable that the final battle between two superiors of the Divine list would attract the attention of the whole world. The master of Samsara Palace fought against the god of war of Zhongzhou State. After Night Spirit was destroyed and Tian Xen, who held a murderous weapon, was killed with a single strike, the entire Dark World took the mysterious palace master's strength seriously. That terrifying strike could shatter heaven and earth. In terms of power alone, it could definitely be ranked in the top 5 of the Divine list. Therefore, today's battle was not only a battle between two Invincible Realm experts on the Divine list, but also a battle between the top 5 in the Dark World. Was it a new god? Or the fall of the Invincible Realm? Everything would be revealed today. Qin Weibai sat quietly in front of the delicate but old dressing table, combing her long hair in a natural and calm manner. The phone was placed aside, and the screen was not completely dark yet. In the faint light, the photo of a young man and a woman snuggling together was reflected in her eyes. The corners of her mouth rose slightly, and her whole person revealed a trace of joy from the bottom of her heart. She hummed like the sounds of nature in the bedroom. It was cold and gentle, and the unknown song filled every corner of the bedroom. There were songs but no lyrics, and the melodious tone was full of melancholy and melancholy. The lipstick was evenly smeared on her pink and slightly pale red lips. She gently pressed her lips together, and the dark red color, even a little scarlet like blood, naturally appeared at the corners of her mouth. There was no extra embellishment. Qin Weibai simply smeared the lipstick, stood up, took off her pajamas, and put on a long dress that was also almost scarlet. All the coldness and holiness seemed to completely fade away in an instant. Red dress, red lips. Flawless. The corners of her eyes rose slightly, and suddenly there was a trace of enchantment and coldness flying out from the inside out. At this moment, Qin Weibai was still devastatingly beautiful, but unlike the noble and cold in the past, her every move seemed to have a kind of flustered charm. In a sense, in front of Qingyun Temple in Lin, and what Taoist priest Xian Xuanzi, the great master of metaphysics, said was actually not wrong. She was a siren. Also enough to bring disaster to a country. Bring disaster to a country and people. Qin Weibai stood quietly in front of the mirror, looking at herself in the mirror, and her eyes were dazed and strange. Such a dress. It was really a long time since she had seen it. She smiled softly and tidied her long hair. The beautiful black hair fell softly on her shoulders, and the long hair reached her waist, shiny and bright. What was seductive behavior? What was charming the common people? Just like the current Qin Weibai, every move of hers was natural. There was a slight knock on the door. The door is unlocked. Qin Weibai stood in front of the mirror and said calmly. There was a slight pause outside the door, and then the door was gently pushed open. A white woman nearly 1.9 meters tall came in with a tray. The woman looked like she was in her 30s, but her figure was not fat. She was plump and sexy, and her long brown hair was tied up, making her look extremely capable. Her appearance was relatively ordinary among Westerners, but she had a mature temperament, and her whole body was full of the exotic charm of a mature woman. The woman walked in with her head down, holding the tray. The food on the tray was simple and rich. A glass of hot milk, a fried egg, and a glass of warm water. There was also a small but exquisite fruit plate, which was cut into pieces of kiwi, dragon fruit, bananas, apples, a few grapes, and small oranges. All kinds of fruits were mixed together, which looked very pleasing. This was Qin Weibai's breakfast every day. The woman held the tray and whispered, "Boss, your breakfast." While speaking, she raised her head. The moment she saw Qin Weibai, she suddenly stopped talking. In her sight, Qin Weibai, dressed in red, stood quietly in front of the mirror, motionless. The loose red dress covered her slim and exquisite figure. She pursed her lips, and her body was as still as a statue. But at this time, she exuded a kind of enchanting charm that almost suffocated other women. Ghost? Angel? The tall white woman's mind was blank. She thought for a long time, and finally seemed to find an accurate word in the Chinese language that she was not very proficient in. Demon. At this moment, Qin Weibai was full of demon aura, so enchanting that it made people's scalps numb. Shadowless, am I beautiful? Qin Weibai asked without looking back. Shadowless, one of the 12 super masters of samsara. After Horsewoman and Flaming Fire all went to East Island, Shadowless temporarily took over Flaming Fire's work and became Qin Weibai's guardian. In the whole samsara, this was a very special position. Shadowless seemed to want to do this job well, so her every move was careful and respectful, almost pious, like the most loyal servant. Hearing Qin Weibai's question, she almost bowed slightly without thinking, and her tone was full of sincere admiration, without any falsehood. Of course, the boss is the most beautiful. This was the real truth, and it was irrefutable. Qin Weibai smiled softly. In the majestic demon aura, Shadowless vaguely felt that the boss's smile was a little sad and lonely. Tianlan won't like me like this. Shadowless lowered her head and didn't say anything. For Li Tianlan, each of the 12 supermasters of samsara had very complicated feelings. They didn't hate or like him, but it was a very special feeling. The boss always hated it when other people disturbed her feelings, so for Li Tianlan, every supermaster instinctively kept silent. Even if they commented, it was basically good. They didn't talk about how Li Tianlan was in their hearts, but at least in their mouths, he was truly unparalleled in the world. The boss hated meaningless flattery the most, but this was the only exception. No matter how much they praised Li Tianlan, the boss just smiled happily, deeply in love, and smiled like a satisfied child. This is the last time. Qin Weibai said slowly. She took a deep look at herself in the mirror, then suddenly turned around. It was like a farewell. I won't have breakfast. As she spoke, her slender and beautiful figure directly walked out of the door. Shadowless froze for a moment, then put the tray aside and hurried to follow. Tianlan is in Changdao now. He just contacted me. I can feel that he was the first one to contact me. It seems that he's fine. Qin Weibai seemed to be in a good mood. At least, she didn't show any nervousness about the coming battle. Young Master Li is unparalleled and talented. East Island is just a small place, and the two invincible realm experts are trapped in the Sky Academy. With young Master Li's strength, he can completely sweep the whole East Island. Boss, don't worry. Shadowless followed Qin Weibai, saying things that could make her get goosebumps when she thought about it. But her expression was natural, even with a trace of admiration. The master of Samsara Palace was mysterious and kept silent all year round. Most of the things in Samsara Palace were handled by Qin Weibai. The 12 supermasters represented power in the outside world. But when it came to each of them, they were mysterious, ruthless, bloodthirsty, crazy, neurotic, aloof, and so on. But when they were around Qin Weibai, they didn't have any moral integrity at all. As long as the boss was happy, they could do anything. Even if the boss said that Li Tianlan could destroy the earth with one sword move, the 12 supermasters would only nod and agree. A smile flashed across Qin Weibai's lips. She said softly, "Although he's fine, I can feel that he's under pressure. He must have had a hard time these days when we lost contact." She paused. "But he'll be fine soon. After today, there will be a lot of people in East Island to help him share the pressure." Shadowless nodded. She was about to say something, like volunteering to show her loyalty. But before she could speak, an old voice sounded in front of her. "Boss Qin." The two went downstairs and walked out of the unit door of the dormitory area. Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy, seemed to have been waiting here. Seeing Qin Weibai coming out, he took the initiative to step forward and say hello. "Good morning, headmaster." Qin Weibai's tone was calm. The morning sun gradually rose. There were less than 2 hours before the final battle. It wasn't a long time, but it was enough for the two sides who had a tacit understanding to make a pre-battle plan. "I just visited Her Highness Palace Master," Zhuang Huayang said with a wry smile. "It's a pity that I didn't see her. What does Samsara think of this battle?" The master of Samsara Palace appeared in the Sky Academy 2 days ago. The moment she entered the Sky Academy, she chose to do closed-door training. Even a director of the decision-making committee visited her in person, but she didn't see her. Regarding this final battle, she completely gave the initiative to Qin Weibai and trusted her without any reservation. "We've discussed it before. There's no need to continue, right?" Qin Weibai said calmly, "This battle is imperative. Maybe it doesn't have to be a life-or-death battle, but we all hope that His Highness Gu Xingyun can do his best. Samsara has been longing for this battle for a long time. I believe that this battle will not let anyone down. It had to be done. Go all out." Zhuang Huayang frowned slightly. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He hesitated several times and finally said, "Boss Qin, I don't quite understand. This is a setup. To put it bluntly, it doesn't matter whether this battle continues or not. I don't quite understand why you and the palace master insist on it. Even if it's just for show, we can understand. Zhongzhou State will also strive for the best result for Her Highness Palace Master. But now, there's no need for show." Qin Weibai interrupted Zhuang Huayang. "What Samsara needs is a real battle, a battle that will convince everyone. The headmaster only needs to pass my words to Gu Xingyun. I can represent the will of the entire Samsara Palace." Zhuang Huayang frowned. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Reason? Boss Qin, I need a reason. Why is His Highness so obsessed with this battle?" Qin Weibai took a deep look at Zhuang Huayang and said calmly, "Because of me. Or because of Tianlun." She walked along the stone path of the Sky Academy and said calmly, "In East Island, Tianlun has killed several superiors of the Thundershocking Realm and more superiors of the Fire-Flaming Realm. There were more Fire-Flaming Realm experts. The headmaster should be very clear about what this meant. East Emperor Palace is only a department-level establishment, and the plot of East Island is still going on. Why don't we guess what level East Emperor Palace will be when Tianlun comes back from East Island?" Zhuang Huayang thought about it seriously for nearly half a minute. He vaguely seemed to understand what Qin Weibai meant, and his face changed slightly. "You want to—" "No, the time is not ripe. At least Samsara should have a certain position in Zhongzhou State. The time is ripe enough." Qin Weibai's tone was indifferent. She was dressed in red and looked unparalleled, but there was a kind of unfathomable light flowing in her eyes like the abyss and the sea. The foundation of samsara is not in Zhongzhou state. It doesn't matter whether we fight for some superficial things or not. Tianlan's performance is getting better and better, so I have to give him a title similar to his strength. After today's battle, there is no need to hide Tianlan's identity. She raised her head and looked straight at the not dazzling morning light on the horizon. She was relaxed. The sun shone on her, and her red dress seemed to be dyed with a layer of gold. She stood in the rising sun, and her whole body was shining with a kind of poignant and dazzling light. Some things, some unique skills, and some people. It's time to surface. She murmured to herself, everything starts today. On the other side of the residential area, a few small but important teams in the dark world walked out of the corridor and went straight to the number 1 training ground. Yi Wuji walked at the end with Feng and Snow Girl, 2 thundershocking realm experts. Lu Xingzangquan, the sect master of Jifeng Sword Raining School in East Island, seemed to be walking with the wind, elegant and unrestrained. Jiang Qinyan, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, looked at Qin Weibai in a red dress. After a slight shock, his eyes became more and more fiery. 7 o'clock in the morning. There was still an hour before the final battle. The spectators from the superpowers in the dark world had begun to enter the venue in advance. Under the bright sunshine, on the number 3 platform of the number 1 training ground, Gu Xingyun had been waiting there one step earlier. He stood motionless on the side of the platform with his eyes closed. He seemed to be integrated with heaven and earth. He wore a robe unique to Zhongzhou state and stepped on the ground barefoot. His momentum kept rising. The fighting intent of Chong Xiao broke through and kept fluctuating in the number 1 training ground. The spectators sat below the platform and looked at Gu Xingyun on the platform with awe-inspiring expressions. At this moment, the governor of Kunlun City had become the real god of war of Zhongzhou state. The overwhelming fighting intent was constantly accumulating and surging, and there was a kind of invincible momentum. Time passed slowly. The aura of Gu Xingyun became more and more terrifying and gradually spread to the whole venue. The hands of the clock quietly pointed to 8 o'clock. All the spectators straightened up subconsciously. A figure in a black cloak suddenly stood on the high platform in the midst of the battle intent that permeated the entire arena. Almost no one noticed it. It seemed to appear out of thin air without any warning. In the crazy momentum of Gu Xingyun, who was almost integrated with heaven and earth, she stood quietly in front of him. The wind in the air blew over. But her wide cloak didn't flutter at all. The venue was silent. This could be said to be the peak battle of the highest level in the dark world in recent years. Everyone opened their eyes wide and refused to miss any detail. In front of Gu Xingyun, the master of Samsara Palace, who was covered in a black cloak, took a step forward. Some things have been too long ago. I'm afraid that you will forget them. I'm afraid that I will forget them. I'm afraid that the dark world will forget them. She opened her mouth softly and her voice spread to the whole venue. So, it's best to remind all of us with today's battle. I don't understand what you mean. Gu Xingyun narrowed his eyes slightly and said in a soft voice. From the bottom of his heart, he naturally didn't want this dispensable battle to happen. But the master of Samsara Palace insisted on fighting a few days ago. In this case, he had no reason to shrink back. He was the god of war of Zhongzhou state and one of the strongest gods in the entire dark world. In the face of any opponent, he had no reason to shrink back or be afraid. In his sight, the master of Samsara Palace moved forward again. That's all the more reason to remind you, in case you really forget. She said softly and reached out her hand to pull something in the air. The whole air seemed to be torn in an instant, and the airflow was running wildly. As the master of Samsara Palace pulled, a sword seemed to be pulled out of the void. In the early morning of June, on the training ground, the temperature dropped instantly. A long sword condensed from ice was held in the master of Samsara Palace's hand. The whole venue seemed to turn from early summer to late winter in an instant. The biting cold air suddenly appeared, and the temperature dropped rapidly. A large area of the sky suddenly became gloomy. The master of Samsara Palace held the sword with one hand. The sharp sword intent that could tear everything instantly burst out of her body. The morning sun never disappeared. It began to rain in the air. The rain turned into ice. The surrounding air continued to drop. Gu Xingyun, who had been extremely calm, suddenly became gloomy. The familiar and strange sword intent covered everything, and almost instantly evoked the most unforgettable memory that he didn't want to recall. Familiar? You can't forget it for 20 years. The master of Samsara Palace took the third step. Her eyes stared at Gu Xingyun's face through the cloak. This sword move is called the fifth blade. The 24 moves of sword, the ultimate unique skill of Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun. The fifth blade, flying snow. The ice rain in the air mixed with the sword intent fell instantly. The rain cut through the air in the air, and a vacuum state appeared one after another. The air was completely chaotic. The crazy sword intent rushed up to the sky. The fourth step was taken. Look, it's snowing. Under the platform, an abrupt voice suddenly sounded. Under the gloomy sky, countless snowflakes fell at the same time without any warning. The snowflakes were white and clear, holy and flawless. The cold sword intent covered the sky and the earth. The killing intent was like the sea, rushing and roaring. The master of Samsara Palace held the sword with one hand and took the fourth step. The woman was mighty. Flying snow in June. Chapter 160. I wanted to write a big chapter of more than 10,000 words, but I can't finish it. I've written part of the second chapter. I'll post it as soon as I finish it. It won't delay tomorrow's update. The Gu family? It sounds powerful and bold. Who can tell me what the Gu family is? I remember. I met your father once. He was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. It was amazing. He called me martial uncle. What about you? Shouldn't you call me something nice as well? I don't deserve anything. Is it enough that my family name is Li? Did I make you lose face in front of your beloved woman? I'm sorry. My name is Kwangtu. You can tell that I'm not a good-tempered person. I'm a little uncultured. My good grandson, don't blame me. This was the first time they met many years ago. Your woman is good. IF*CK her. No, I've seen her before. You look familiar. What's your name? Gu Xingyun. Oh. We are in different generations. How are your grandfather and father? Last time they sent someone to kill me. Tut, almost. Just a little bit. Too careless. Oh, you didn't do it? Your whole family has explained it to my father. It's meaningless to say it again. Do you need me to throw the evidence in your faces? I'm in a good mood today. You kowtow to me and I'll let it go. Young and frivolous. In his memory, he seemed to be a figure who seemed to be cynical and careless at all times. Under the arrogant and domineering appearance, he could hit the nail on the head. He was warm, mean, talented, and the future god of war of Zhongzhou state. You can't take it after only 3 moves? I still have a lot of swords. Do you want to take them? The Gu family is really getting worse. In 3 years, you have assassinated 6 times. Can't you stand it? In fact, even if I die, so what? The Gu family has no successor. It can't change anything. I'm in the invincible realm. Wait for me. Let your father and the others wait. In his memory, it seemed to be his first failure. From beginning to end, he was defeated in 3 moves. At that time, he didn't feel humiliated when he looked at the figure that looked down on him. Perhaps with the passage of time, the frivolity of the other party had become mild, or perhaps it was due to other reasons, but he did not feel angry at that time. However, the way the people around him looked at him as if it was a matter of course stung his nerves and made him feel extremely embarrassed. At that time, he felt that he was a joke, a clown. Even though the Gu clan had always been like this. The legend of Qin? Interesting. But was this enough? With just you guys? I don't want to die. Who can kill me? Just you? 1, 2, 3. Heh, just you and these ants. Do you think you can kill me? Sinner. Traitors should be executed. Is this what you want? Is that what you want? It really hurts. My entire life. Heh, my surname is Gu after all. I really want to see her. The curtain of glory fell, and the era changed. Hundreds of years of glory was completely destroyed in the heavy rain. Time flew by, and spring and summer came and went. Spring breeze. Summer, autumn leaves, flying snow. Year after year, the memory of the past faded, the sword intent of the past dissipated, the glory was covered with dust, and the glory was spurned. Only he was thriving. The sun was shining above his head, and everything seemed to have disappeared. This was the era that belonged to him. After many years, he was now the god of war of Zhongzhou state, and the unbearable memory seemed to have completely disappeared. Until this moment, the clear sky suddenly became gloomy, and the world was snowing. The familiar and strange sword intent surged violently, as if it would shatter heaven and earth. The scenes that he thought he had forgotten began to emerge in his mind bit by bit, becoming clearer and clearer. Gu Xingyun finally realized that those memories that he thought he had forgotten actually still existed, and the shadow that once hung over his head had not disappeared either. Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun, the Li family, the 24 moves of sword, and the 5th blade. It was snowing in June. Did this sword move want to tell the world something? A huge and strong anger instantly occupied Gu Xingyun's consciousness. His expression became gloomy, and his eyes suddenly became distorted in a very short time. The master of Samsara Palace in front of him was a remnant of the Li family? How could he not have heard of a female invincible realm expert? Who was this person? No matter who she was, he would not allow anyone else to touch the sensitive case of that year. Absolute. Blau. Blau. Touching the wall of memory, everything in the past came to his heart. In a strong rage, Gu Xingyun directly became crazy. He was like a dragon whose reverse scale had been touched. At this moment, all interests and compromises had disappeared in his heart. The 5th blade, flying snow. Under the sky in June, the temperature of the number 1 training ground plummeted. The dense snowflakes were like a white sky curtain, covering the ground neatly and densely. The sword energy was rising. The snowflakes were falling. You want to fight? Then fight. The master of Samsara Palace took the 5th step. Her aura suddenly rose to the extreme along with her sword intent. She was originally a tall, plump, and even slightly chubby figure. She was not ugly, but she could not be considered to be extremely beautiful either. However, at this moment, her every move revealed a piercingly cold and dignified aura that was like that of a fiend god. She was unparalleled. Gu Xingyun suddenly rushed forward. He changed from small steps to big steps. He charged, jumped, and soared into the air. His body disappeared in everyone's sight, getting higher and higher, as if he was going to the sky step by step. There was no unusual phenomenon around him. Or in other words, he himself was an unusual phenomenon. He turned into a sword. The long roar spread in the Sky Academy. At this moment, Gu Xingyun completely took off his elegant and light coat, and his whole body was full of peerless sharpness. The snowflakes in the air all pressed down. Gu Xingyun's body rose. The snowflakes, like a sky curtain, suddenly rotated with the surge of the air. A large vortex suddenly appeared in the snow-white sky, and a strong airflow appeared between heaven and earth. The strong wind blew over. On the ground, countless turf was rolled up, and the snowflakes condensed into ice. Endless huge ice swords almost covered Gu Xingyun's body in the rotation of countless vortexes. In midair, Gu Xingyun's angry voice sounded. Break! Boom! With Gu Xingyun as the center, a great deal of airwaves surged and spread around him. Countless ice swords were completely shattered around him. Countless pieces of ice and frost fell on the ground and then rolled back in an instant. Gu Xingyun's body, which had torn the snow curtain apart, had already descended from the sky and directly rushed to the master of Samsara Palace on the ground. 10 skills of true martial arts. 3 elements final kill. It's the remnant of the Li family. Investigate. We must find out the identity of the master of Samsara Palace. Start investigating 20 years ago. I'd like to see who she is. The whole dark world was now paying attention to this battle. As the host, Zhongzhou State could not be indifferent to this battle even if it knew that it was a trap. Especially a few days ago, when the master of Samsara Palace clearly showed that this battle needed both sides to go all out, the whole Zhongzhou state paid close attention to the ongoing battle. Samsara Palace and Kunlun City rarely interacted before, so few people knew the Samsara Palace's attitude toward Samsara City. This battle appointment was somewhat inexplicable in advance. It could be said that Li Tianlan was targeted in the Sky Academy. After Gu Changjiang was killed, the letter of challenge from the Samsara Palace had reached Kunlun City. The master of Samsara Palace's attitude toward Gu Xingyun was not peaceful. Everyone could see the resentment between them, but they did not know what it was. Now, it seemed that all the answers to the riddle were in front of them. 24 moves of sword. The fifth blade, flying snow. Was she from the Li family? Everyone's eyes were a little dazed. In the monitoring room of the Sky Academy, looking at the picture on the big screen, Gu Fengbua, the deputy governor of Samsara City, was undoubtedly the most excited. He spoke without thinking and even directly used the word remnant. Governor Gu, please pay attention to your words. For hundreds of years, the Li family has been the god of war and hero of our Zhongzhou state. Although Li Kuangtu committed treason, Senior Li is still alive, and in order to make up for his mistakes, Senior Li has imprisoned himself at the border for many years. Remnant? Is Senior Li also a remnant? At the forefront of the screen, Marshal Yi Dongxing, a member of the Zhongzhou State Decision-Making Committee, the Deputy Minister of Army Headquarters, and known as the God of Army, glanced at Gu Fengbua coldly and said in an extremely dangerous tone, "Of course I don't mean that." No one could deny Senior Li's achievements, but Gu Fengbua, the governor of Samsara City, repeated it several times. Finally, he snorted and said simply, "I think there's something wrong with her. We must find out." Of course, they must find out. No one knew how flustered Gu Fengbua was the moment he saw the fifth blade. He was like a beggar who suddenly entered a billionaire's mansion, then killed the owner, occupied the owner's property, and suddenly learned that the owner was not dead after squandering for many years. Perhaps this analogy was not appropriate, but the feeling of guilt was the same. Even Gu Fengbua himself was surprised by his fluster. Li Honghe imprisoned himself at the border, and the Li family completely fell into desolation. The whole Zhongzhou state seemed to be waiting for his death, waiting for the day when the Li family came to an end. But who could have thought that the Li family had another expert of the invincible realm and established Samsara many years ago, and now it had become one of the superpowers in the whole dark world? How was this possible? Where did this damned woman come from? Gu Fengbua's mind was in a mess. Besides panic, there was only confusion. During the period when the Li family was at its peak, every member of the Li family had appeared in the intelligence of the Gu family. After the Li family fell into desolation and Li Kuangtu died in battle, the Gu family also knew the whereabouts of every member of the Li family. In this case, how could they miss the master of Samsara Palace? Moreover, some of the 12 supermasters of Samsara had appeared many years ago, which meant that Samsara had existed since then. If the master of Samsara Palace was even from the Li family, they had no reason not to know. With the old man Li Honghe's devotion to his country, even if the Li family really had a female heavenly son who was not weaker than Li Kuangtu, they would definitely file it with Zhongzhou State. But in the past many years, Zhongzhou State knew nothing about this person. In other words, according to all kinds of intelligence, the master of Samsara Palace should not have existed in the Li family in the first place. Why did she know the unique skills of the Li family? The Li family, Li Honghe, 24 moves of sword, the master of Samsara Palace, Gu Fengbua's mind was in a mess, and that was what he looked like when he was really confused. And obviously, it was not only the master of Samsara Palace that he was worried about. In public, the master of Samsara Palace directly used the 24 moves of sword, the unique skill of the Li family, to fight Gu Xingyun. The deeper meaning behind it was even more extraordinary. From now on, if people regarded Samsara as the secret pawn that the Li family placed overseas, just like the relationship between East Island and Night Spirit, the status of the entire Li family in Zhongzhou State might change dramatically. In a panic, Gu Fengbua subconsciously looked at the figures standing in front of the monitoring room. the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong. The current #1 expert of Zhongzhou State was silently looking at the screen in front of him, holding his chin with his hand, and also looking thoughtful. Gu Fenghua opened his mouth and was about to speak when a voice beside him sounded, with a gentle smile. Tianzong is the master of Samsara Palace using the unique skill of Zhuanyuantai? The fifth blade? You knew her identity before, didn't you? The voice sounded a little old, but it was full of vigor and energy. It was an old man who looked no more than 50 years old, but his weathered eyes showed that he was actually much older than he looked. At this time, he was also standing in front of the screen, watching the fight between immortals on the screen. He asked with interest, Hua Xingyang, the Executive Deputy Prime Minister of the Cabinet, a member of the Decision-Making Committee of Zhongzhou State. He was one of the leaders of the academics standing in front of the stage. In a sense, in terms of official level, Deputy Prime Minister Hua Xingyang was the highest-ranking magnate among all the spectators, and also the magnate who could best represent the attitude of Zhongzhou State. I just knew it not long ago. Wang Tianzong seemed to be thinking about something, and his tone was a little slow. At the moment when it snowed in June, the first person this Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State thought of was Li Tianlan. After this battle, combined with Samsara Qin Weibai's attitude toward Li Tianlan, all kinds of speculations were inevitable. Li Tianlan's identity seemed to be about to be exposed. Wang Tianzong didn't understand Samsara's plan. From the standpoint of him and the Wang family of Beihai, once the identity of Li Tianlan, the descendant of the Li family, was exposed, there were indeed advantages and disadvantages. When he realized this, his mind had basically shifted from this battle to the next adjustment of the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group. Do you know her identity? Hua Xingyang chuckled and said, back then, the Li family was the pillar of Zhongzhou State. 20 years ago, although my position was not high, I also knew about the Li family. Who was this master of Samsara Palace? I've never heard of Senior Li having an adopted daughter. As one of the leaders of the academics who had the most frequent contact with Samsara, Hua Xingyang also knew the identity of the master of Samsara Palace at this time. This feeling was different from Gu Fenghua's panic. There was surprise and also a touch of joy. If the identity of the master of Samsara Palace could be confirmed, then in the future, when the academics checked and balanced the Southeast Group, the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group, they might really have a good card. Perhaps it would be like how Zhongzhou State, which held the North Korean nuclear issue, treated the former world overlord United States in the six-party talks many, many years ago. I don't know. Wang Tianzong shook his head slowly. He did know not long ago that the inheritance of the master of Samsara Palace came from the Li family, and he also knew a more interesting fact. The surname of the master of Samsara Palace was Gu. To be honest, Wang Tianzong wasn't even sure whether the master of Samsara Palace really had something to do with the Li family. The surname could be a coincidence, but the inheritance couldn't be faked. Recently, the Wang family of Beihai had been pretending that the master of Samsara Palace was a member of the Li family, intending to confirm her identity. But so far, the news Wang Tianzong got was all chaos and uncertainty. As the closest comrade of the Li family, the Wang family of Beihai had been investigating since 20 years ago or even earlier, but they couldn't find the identity of the master of Samsara Palace, which was very thought-provoking. So he didn't hide it at this time. He also needed other groups to find some clues for him that could solve his doubts. I've seriously investigated some things, but the results are very messy. All kinds of things seem to show that the master of Samsara Palace doesn't exist. Or to be clear, at least the master of Samsara Palace didn't exist in the Li family at that time. And according to the information we got, the master of Samsara Palace is at least 40 years old, right? Hua Xingyang hesitated slightly and murmured to himself, in this case, there are many possibilities. Ask Senior Li? I haven't been to the border to visit Senior Li for several years. Hua Xingyang continued to say with a smile. Wang Tianzong smiled and said nothing. Li Hongham might know something, but obviously, even if he knew, he wouldn't say it. The Li family had been quiet for too long in the past 20 years, so long that many people had forgotten something. It wasn't until the 24 moves of sword reappeared today after so many years that Wang Tianzong suddenly remembered. When they were still very young. Although the god of war of Zhongzhou state in Zhuanyuantai had outstanding combat strength, he was more famous for being good at making arrangements and setting up the overall situation. He had lived far away at the border for the past 20 years. Had he really not heard anything? Chapter 161. A 5,000-word chapter. There are 2 chapters left today. Asking for monthly votes. Attack against attack. For the entire dark world, Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou state, was also famous, but in fact he was extremely low-key and mysterious. The Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou state was unparalleled. The hidden god of Zhongzhou state stood aloof from worldly affairs. But when it came to the god of war of Zhongzhou state, people could only think of 4 words. Unfathomable. Compared with Li Honghe, the war god of the previous generation in Zhongzhou state, Gu Xingyun also liked to make arrangements. However, the former's vision was extremely broad. Every chess piece on the chessboard was aboveboard and upright, which was a real overt plot. Many of his chess pieces were also extremely obscure, but the moment the chess pieces were revealed, they revealed a kind of unstoppable strength and magnanimity. Gu Xingyun focused more on conspiracies. Over the past 20 years, Zhongzhou state seemed to be peaceful, but undercurrents had been surging inside. The god of war of Zhongzhou state, the only one who was not from Zhuanyuantai in hundreds of years, guarded the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state, but he rarely took action. Or it could be said that he rarely took action in public. He was secretive and straightforward, and he was best at conspiring with a tiger. When he appeared in front of everyone, he always seemed to wear a conspirator's mask. He looked elegant and gentle, but in fact he was a real hero and unpredictable. In the past many years, Gu Xingyun gave people the feeling of a businessman. Cooperation and trade, killing and betrayal, glory and desolation, ups and downs, right and wrong, good and evil, he rarely took action. But for many years, Kunlun City would quietly participate in every major event in the dark world. Thunder could be heard in silence, and flowers could be seen in colorless places. In many things that seemed to develop naturally, the forces of Kunlun City, which no one would pay special attention to, suddenly became the most critical role. The god of war of Zhongzhou state ranked 4th on the world divine list, but most of the time, he always showed people the deepest schemes and shrewdness. Gu Xingyun's strength was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. However, very few people were able to see just how terrifying it was. For many years, today seemed to be the first time that Gu Xingyun took action in front of people, and he did his best. This was Gu Xingyun, who was extremely strange to everyone. Fierce and powerful, it seemed to carry the sharpness of the heavens and the earth. Every single move he made was filled with an unbelievably wild, offensive and oppressive feeling. Triple kill. His whole body seemed to have turned into a sharp sword, approaching the master of Samsara Palace in an instant. The strong airflow gathered around him crazily. The snow-white and cold sky was completely torn apart in an instant. The sword intent roared and condensed again, and he had already appeared in front of the master of Samsara Palace. 4 ultimate returned to origin. The airflow surged. On the high platform, the surrounding air suddenly shook. Dust flew up, and the entire high platform suddenly exploded. Countless stones flew up for a moment, and then disappeared in an instant, directly turning into the most primitive nothingness. The battlefield instantly became blurry. Zhuanyuantai had the strongest sword. Kunlun City had the strongest domain. And the Wang family of Beihai had the strongest outbreak. There were 10 styles in the 10 skills of true martial arts, the world-shaking unique technique of Kunlun City. The 8th and 9th styles were the core domain of Kunlun City. The area within a radius of 100 meters instantly turned into a void. This was the symbol of an invincible realm expert. But when Gu Xingyun's strength reached such a level, as long as he wanted, his every move could be surrounded by the void. Oh, it's wonderful! Is he desperate so soon? The high platform had completely disappeared. Under the effect of 4 moves to 1, the void continued to spread around. In an instant, It broke through the range of 100 meters and kept expanding. In the domain, the master of Samsara Palace, holding the sword with one hand, suddenly froze for a moment. Dozens of spectators had all stood up subconsciously. At the forefront of the crowd, Yi Wuji squinted and stared at the blurry scene in front of him, whispering to himself, "Teacher, the master of Samsara Palace will lose?" Feng stood beside Yi Wuji and asked in a low voice. He lowered his head to hide the indescribable passion in his eyes and subconsciously glanced around. The goddess Qin, whom he had dreamed of tasting, was not here. At such an important moment, he did not know what she was planning behind the scenes. In recent years, this seemed to be the mode that Samsara was best at. The palace master with matchless combat strength was in charge of fighting, and Qin Weibai was in charge of operation. On such an important occasion, she did not show up, which had already aroused everyone's vigilance and uneasiness. But for Feng, there was only regret. The first beauty of Zhongzhou State. He really did not know what kind of peerless beauty she was. Lose? Yi Wuji did not look at the proudest student beside him. He shook his head and said in a complicated tone, with strong surprise and fear, "Maybe you don't know the meaning of the sword stroke of the master of Samsara Palace just now. That sword stroke belongs to a set of unique skills called 24 Moves of Sword. It was the core inheritance of the former war god family of Zhongzhou State, and also the unique skill that made them invincible in the dark world for hundreds of years." The corner of his mouth trembled. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "That is the strongest sword intent. The true meaning is to break everything." Everything? Feng was a little confused. Everything. Tianhai Wuji looked serious. Including the void of the invincible realm. Feng opened his mouth, but before he could continue to ask, in the blurry air, the blazing sword light filled the whole field in the blink of an eye. On the training ground, where the coldness had not yet dissipated, the heat wave hit people. In the domain that should not have any matter, a flame burst out completely, as if burning the void. The seventh swordsman, Summer Solstice. Behind Gu Xingyun, the broken ice chips began to burn in an instant. The sword intent changed to extreme, and the orange flame swept the battlefield. In the blink of an eye, the snowy sky curtain torn by Gu Xingyun disappeared. Suddenly, a torrent of several hundred meters long appeared between heaven and earth, traversing the heavens. The torrent surged violently, just like boiling magma. The master of Samsara Palace waved her sword. A large amount of magma flowed in the air like a long river. From top to bottom, it went straight into the domain that Gu Xingyun had spread out for hundreds of meters. The twisted and blurry domain began to expand directly, and the magma flowed wantonly with the sword light. The master of Samsara Palace and Gu Xingyun rushed together. The sword light that seemed to be about to fly out of the whole world became brighter and brighter. Their bodies seemed to have completely disappeared. The domain full of sword light and magma kept shrinking and expanding. Several invincible realm superiors who were watching the battle opened their domains almost at the same time. The next moment, the sky fell and the earth cracked. The domain of nothingness exploded like a real thing. The surging magma set off huge waves that were tens of meters high. The scorching temperature rose and spread. The magma was endless, and suddenly it covered the whole area of hundreds of meters around. The green grass was completely submerged, and the whole training ground shook violently. In the core of the battlefield, the sound of weapons colliding kept rising. The invincible sword light kept flying, and there were more and more of them. Under the sword light, there was a sea of fire. At this moment, Feng could clearly see that not far from him, the domain of an invincible realm expert shook for a moment in the impact of the magma. A thunder-shocking realm expert standing not far from him suddenly opened his eyes wide. Before he could even make a sound, a torrent had rushed past him. The lava, mixed with the extremely sharp sword intent, rushed over. The thunder-shocking realm expert had completely disappeared. There was a slight flash of lightning in the magma, which seemed to be the only trace of the existence of the thunder-shocking realm expert. This was, Feng's heart skipped a beat. Chaos, what do you mean? Beside the invincible realm expert whose domain was unstable, a strong white man in his 50s suddenly stood up and roared angrily. The man's momentum was extremely amazing. Even in the battle of the invincible realm, he was very elegant when he was angry. "We are allies here. You deliberately loosened the domain just now and made me lose a precious subordinate. Chaos." The commander of Knights Templars in Northern Europe. Although he was not an expert on the divine list, Knights Templars was backed by the Vatican, the largest religious organization in the world. With such a backer, Knights Templars could be said to be really domineering in Northern Europe. Chaos's behavior was extremely high profile, and he regarded himself as the chosen one of God. In Northern Europe and even in the whole Dark World, he was famous for being domineering. Hearing the questioning from the so-called allies nearby, Chaos was expressionless. He stared at the whole audience with a serious look in his eyes, twitched the corner of his mouth casually, and said disdainfully, "Allies? No. How can the heretics of the Dark Knights be qualified to be with the people of God? You should be purified by the flame." It was indeed the Dark Knights. Feng's mind was running wild. The Dark World in the area of Northern Europe could be said to be a real separatist regime. It was the place where the major dark forces occupied all year round, and even the battlefield. The headquarters of the two largest knight groups in Europe, Knights Templars and Dark Knights, were located in Northern Europe. These two could be said to be real enemies, and they fought all year round. Because of the fight between the two, there were a lot of interests and variables. Northern Europe could now be said to be a relatively strong place where the major dark forces had penetrated. Heretics. Holiness and darkness? Feng's mind was spinning, but his body was suddenly pulled back by someone. At the same time, he also noticed that the superior of the half-step invincible realm in the Dark Knights changed his face dramatically, and he roared to retreat. In the case that Chaos of the Knights Templars intended to kill them, being a little closer to the battle between Gu Xingyun and the Master of Samsara Palace was equivalent to suicide. This kind of figure, which was equivalent to the god of the mortal world, could easily pose a great threat to the superior of the thunder-shocking realm, even if it was unintentional, or even if it was the aftermath of the battle. Feng looked back subconsciously. In his blurred vision, the Master of Samsara Palace was still holding the ice sword, but the flame that was getting hotter and hotter suddenly began to spread. Gu Xingyun was surrounded by lightning, and the lightning condensed into thousands of rays of light that were as long as 100 meters around him, rotating around him like lasers. Dark clouds appeared in the sky again. In the sound of thunder, the lightning fell. The lightning around Gu Xingyun became brighter and brighter, connected with the lightning, like the god of thunder. The dense flashing light kept dancing in the air, and the body of the Master of Samsara Palace had already flown up and spun. The eighth blade, burning sky. This was the power of the eighth blade, which belonged to the invincible realm, and the sword intent of the god's domain. The spreading sea of magma and fire shrank in an instant, and countless magma gathered toward the Master of Samsara Palace, more and more. Thunder and lightning rose in the sky. A strong gust of wind suddenly arrived. It was windy. It was not a strong wind, but a fiercely rotating tornado. Fire tornado. The fierce wind mixed with sword intent drove a large amount of magma to rise like a dragon. The sword intent turned again. The magma that gathered together turned with the whistling wind. The wind and fire expanded in the air, like the power of heaven and earth. The fire tornado spun rapidly and rushed to Gu Xingyun. Wherever it passed, there was no grass, only a sea of fire. Dense, continuous, crazy. Fighting all the time. The moment the two sides came into contact, the battle did not stop at all. All kinds of unique skills were mixed with ruthless attacks, and everyone watching was dumbfounded. Are they really going to fight to the death? The lightning and the magma collided and surged. In the battlefield within a radius of hundreds of meters, there were gorgeous and fatal colors like fireworks everywhere. Gu Xingyun looked calm and rushed directly to the fire tornado in front of him. Countless rotating lightning around him gathered into a huge shield in front of him, breaking through the waves of fire, breaking through the hurricane. Gu Xingyun's body shook violently. Countless lightning around him instantly left his body. A large number of light rays, like meteors, rushed to the master of Samsara Palace without reservation. The 8th supreme sword move. The 7 unique flowing lights. Sparks and lightning exploded in the air one after another. The entire number 1 training ground had become a real death zone. The fire and lightning fell on the ground, and the raging fire burned on the ground that had been blasted by the lightning. All the spectators had retreated to the outside of the number 1 training ground, watching the world-shaking battle with a solemn look. Gu Xingyun was moving forward. His steps were getting bigger and faster. Running, sprinting. Countless lightning and sparks exploded around him. In the doomsday-like scene, he was like a demon shuttling in the end of the world, moving forward with indomitable will and looking down on everything. Take off. With the rotating sword light, the master of Samsara Palace fell. Gu Xingyun's body rose from the ground and instantly passed over the head of the master of Samsara Palace. His legs gathered strength in the air. Gu Xingyun's face was cold. His body fell and he stepped directly on the head of the master of Samsara Palace. Domain. A domain that was countless times stronger than before appeared directly. 9th secluded impasse. The bright sky completely faded in an instant. A thick darkness suddenly fell. The fire went out, the lightning disappeared, and the air was broken. Everything around seemed to return to the most primitive state. Darkness. In the void. There was nothing. In the darkness, the master of Samsara Palace suddenly raised her head. Without any hesitation. The 15th blade. Samsara. The sword light hidden in the darkness lit up. A sword stabbed straight. The shattering of land. The 19th blade. The whole world seemed to be broken in an instant. In the messy and extremely violent sword intent, there were only illusions left. A figure that was very strange to everyone suddenly appeared in everyone's sight. It seemed real and illusory, as if it was far away in the sky. He stepped forward, raised his sword, and stabbed straight. This was a vague but clear shadow. His movement was extremely slow, but it had a kind of strength and aggressiveness that could break heaven and earth. In the scene that seemed real and illusory, he raised the sword edge. This was an extremely quiet sword, but also an extremely violent sword. The endless void was full of gods and demons, and all living beings in the world. With the thrust of the sword, everything vanished into thin air under the sword. What was invincibility? What was the peak? This sword was the real invincibility and peak. Who is this? Everyone, including Gu Xingyun, subconsciously had a question. In the monitoring room, Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong, who had seen this scene and even the shadow, had narrowed his eyes tightly. This sword again. This shadow again. He had seen it on Mount Dibing, but that sword had not been used. Now he saw it again. This sword tore apart the domain of the 9th secluded impasse of Kunlun City in an instant. In front of the sword intent that almost shattered heaven and earth, even as the Sword Emperor, he felt suffocated for a moment. The 15th blade. Samsara. Who was the master of Samsara Palace? Whose sword intent did she reincarnate into? This was a question that Wang Tianzong was very interested in. After seeing that sword for the first time, he had secretly studied the information of the war gods of Xuanyuantai. He could basically be sure that the sword intent of the master of Samsara Palace did not match any war god of Xuanyuantai of Kunlun City at all. But the sword intent of Samsara was not fictitious. This sword could be used, which proved that this person did exist. Who is she? Who was she reincarnated? For a moment, Wang Tianzong even wanted to try this sword that made him suffocated and excited. The cold sword edge stabbed straight up. Gu Xingyun, whose expression changed dramatically, suddenly rose. The domain formed by the 9th secluded impasse was completely torn apart in an instant. The darkness collapsed and was condensed by the sword intent. A black tide that seemed to tear the heaven and earth suddenly appeared on the battlefield. It went straight up and fiercely hit everything above it. Gu Xingyun's body rose nearly 10 meters. His eyes narrowed tightly, and his face was unprecedentedly cold and hard. The black tide rose straight up. Gu Xingyun reached out his hands, made a gesture of holding hands, and suddenly smashed down. Boom! An explosive roar resounded through the whole field. A purer and almost perfect dark domain suddenly appeared. A full blow. The dark domain was compatible with the black tide. The most perfect domain fell straight down. This was the strongest blow. 10 skills of true martial arts. 10th unique domain. A cruel smile flashed across Gu Xingyun's mouth. Before the smile disappeared, his expression had changed dramatically. It was as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. It was absurd, shocking, incredible, and unbelievable. He suddenly opened his eyes wide. In addition to shock, there was only pure terror left in his eyes. The 10th unique domain below, which was far more perfect and powerful than the 9th secluded impasse, disappeared instantly. It didn't break, but disappeared inexplicably. The darkness disappeared without a trace, and the sun shrouded the earth. Only the sword was still rising. The shattering of land. At the moment when light and darkness alternated, a loud noise suddenly rang out on the battlefield, mixed with Gu Xingyun's voice full of fear. 10th unique domain. Who the hell are you? 10th unique domain. This was the only reason. This woman, who had the core inheritance of the Li family, had been forbearing from the beginning until the last moment. When Gu Xingyun used the 10th unique domain, this woman, this damn woman, actually used the 10th unique domain in the sword intent of the shattering of land. The real 10th unique domain. The same unique technique was perfectly offset. But how the F*CK was this possible? The loud noise spread. The violent smoke mixed with the ashes of the fire spread like ripples on the ground, and countless blood sprinkled in the smoke. In the midst of the chaos, the master of Samsara Palace stood there quietly. But Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou state, had disappeared from the battlefield. The warm sun shone brightly, and the sound of the surging river and sea came from afar. Everything was soft and beautiful. The entire scene was dead silent. The master of Samsara Palace stood there quietly. After a long time, her body moved slightly. Through the black veil under the cloak, she looked up at the sky in her sight. Her eyes were complicated with regret, but more than that, there was a kind of attachment from the soul. The past was ethereal, and the present was stable. She glanced at the crowd watching the ceremony in the distance, turned around, and left silently. The soft wind blew away her whisper, and she was in a trance. Chapter 162. It wasn't until the powerful black figure disappeared from their sight that the silent crowd regained some vitality. The soft voices were very low at the beginning. They were very careful and sounded more like whispers. After nearly 10 minutes, the crowd's volume completely returned to normal. Peace had been restored on the battlefield. The twisted air lost its power and became stable. Ice chips and flames filled the sky. When the gentle wind blew, the grass was wantonly decayed. Countless ashes after being burned by the flames rose in the wind and drifted to the nearby river and sea. The flat ground was already in a mess. Within a radius of nearly a kilometer, the places where the fire tornado blew were all ruined and desolate. The spectators from the dark forces stood in front of the battlefield and looked at everything in front of them. Everyone seemed to be thinking about something. The tornado that swept the world and the black tide that shattered everything seemed to be continuing. The invincible sword intent spread to the highest part of the sky. The sword and the flowing light still collided with each other in the dark domain. The illusionary figure was still clear. He raised his sword and shattered the mountains and rivers. The whispers lasted for a few minutes and then fell silent. Today's battle lasted less than 10 minutes from beginning to end, but it could be said to be the most powerful battle between gods in the dark world in the past 20 years. The result was obvious, but also somewhat confusing. But everyone knew that with the end of this battle, the ranking on the divine list was bound to have a slight adjustment in the near future. Gu Xingyun lost? Someone in the crowd suddenly said in a low voice. It was silent all around. Gu Xingyun lost. The result was obvious now. But the question was, what happened to Gu Xingyun? It was a battle to the death, but now the result was clear. Gu Xingyun disappeared. Everything happened too fast when black and white alternated. It could be said to be the most wonderful part of the battle, but it was also a moment that no one saw clearly. Gu Xingyun disappeared. Was he alive or dead? Such a brilliant battle, but in the end, it ended in such an inexplicable ending. In an instant, everyone seemed to have a stomach full of anger. In the crowd, Tianhai Wuji suddenly turned around and looked around. He frowned and asked, "Where is Principal Zhuang?" As the headmaster of the Sky Academy, Zhuang Huayang could be said to be the real host and the person in charge of receiving all the visitors. After they arrived at the Sky Academy, Wang Tianzong, the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, showed up and then disappeared, maintaining his deterrent power as the first on the divine list. For the rest of the time, Zhuang Huayang was in charge of receiving them. However, when everyone looked over, they found that Zhuang Huayang, who had been sitting with them and smiling not long ago, had completely disappeared without them noticing. And didn't you notice? The Sky Academy seems to be too quiet today. Lu Shengzangquan walked out and suddenly said. Everyone was stunned again. It was already past 8 in the morning. Usually, at this time, the freshmen of the Sky Academy had already started their classes. Before, they were attracted by the fierce battle, so no one paid attention to it. At this time, when Lu Shengzangquan reminded them, they suddenly found that the whole Sky Academy seemed to be dead silent, as if all the teachers and students had completely disappeared. The atmosphere in the crowd instantly became strange. Lu Shengzangquan and Tianhai Wuji, who were entangled with complicated grievances, looked at each other quietly. Before Tianhai Wuji could speak, a phone suddenly rang. Tianhai Wuji took out his phone and looked at the number. He raised his eyebrows slightly, seeming to be surprised. He picked up the phone and said calmly, "Mr. Miyamoto, what's the matter?" "Mr. Tianhai, what's the result of the battle in Zhongzhou State?" On the phone, Shinichi Miyamoto, the only supreme ninja in East Island, sounded a little tired. He seemed to be calling Tianhai Wuji at the right time. When it was about time, he directly called. "The master of Samsara Palace won." Tianhai Wuji's tone was calm, with a hint of joy. Although the inexplicable disappearance of Gu Xingyun, the war god of Zhongzhou State, under the sword light of the master of Samsara Palace, a large amount of blood spilled out was real. Even if Gu Xingyun was still alive, he must be seriously injured, which was more conducive for them to carry out the action plan. Gu Xingyun, if I'm right, should be seriously injured. A real serious injury. Should be. Shinichi Miyamoto retorted coldly. Tianhai Wuji was a little embarrassed. As an invincible realm expert on the divine list, he didn't see the last strike between the two clearly. It was not a good thing to say. He answered vaguely, "Mr. Miyamoto, I'm ready to take action at any time." On the phone, Shinichi Miyamoto fell silent. He was silent for about half a minute before he said in a low voice, "Mr. Tianhai, if it's possible, please take our people back to East Island. The more the better. If the situation doesn't allow, you and Mr. Lushing can give up on the others and come back first. I'm sorry I didn't tell you in advance. The situation in East Island is a little out of control. I tried, but I failed. Most of the elites of Zhongzhou State are in East Island now, lurking all over East Island." The bright and dazzling sun shone on the ground, and the hot air surrounded everyone. For a moment, Tianhai Wuji even thought he had an auditory hallucination. "What?" he said subconsciously. Then he realized what the news he just heard meant. His face changed dramatically, and he subconsciously raised his voice. "What are you talking about? Why didn't you tell me earlier? Does it make any sense, Mr. Tianhai?" Shinichi Miyamoto gave a bitter smile. "We weren't sure if this was a trap set by Zhongzhou State or not. We couldn't be sure whether this was set in East Island or Zhongzhou State. If we told you in advance, we would only panic. Now that I've heard what you said, I'm almost sure that this is set in East Island. Your situation now may not be dangerous, but it's not optimistic. The most important thing is that East Island needs your and Mr. Liushing's support. I'll be right back," Tianhai Wuji said flatly, interrupting Shinichi Miyamoto. He held the phone tightly. Suddenly, he seemed to realize something. he asked subconsciously, then, he glanced around with the corner of his eyes. Wuxia and Xianxia's eyebrows were slightly furrowed, and his face looked serious. But Huan Kong, the superior of the invincible realm in fantasy world, and Chaos, the commander of the Knights Templars, looked calm. No one could tell what they were thinking. Others, he said vaguely and quickly. Shinichi Miyamoto immediately understood what Tianhai Wuji meant. He sighed deeply and said in a deep voice, "We can't hide the news from East Island. Now the country is in chaos, and the whole dark world knows about it. But South America, North America, and Northern Europe haven't done anything yet. Of course, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Mr. Tianhai, I'm under a lot of pressure at home. I don't have the energy to care about other things." Tianhai Wuji's heart sank again. He knew what kind of person Shinichi Miyamoto was. His tone showed that the situation at home was so bad that it couldn't be delayed. Who on earth led the team from Zhongzhou State to East Island? The look in his eyes changed slightly. He took a deep breath and hung up the phone. Jiang Chenyan, Huan Kong, and Chaos, the three of them were all expressionless. No one knew what they were thinking about. Tianhai Wuji sneered in his heart. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't tell him about East Island until now because he didn't want him to panic. At the same time, he still hoped that they could continue to act in Zhongzhou State. But it was impossible that the Jiang family of South America, Fantasy World, and Knights Templars didn't get the news. Their silence until now had subtly reflected their possible change of attitude. Allies or enemies kept changing in the general trend. Tianhai Wuji couldn't say anything. He could only strengthen his defense. If the situation at East Island was so bad that it even caused the collapse of the special warfare system, no matter if it was Fantasy World, Knights Templars, or the Jiang family of South America, they wouldn't give up the benefits at hand. At that time, East Island, Tianhai Wuji's eyes were cold. He subconsciously held the hilt of the saber at his waist with one hand. "Let's go," he said in a firm tone. "Go back to East Island now." The heaven and earth in front of him suddenly shook violently. In the distance, a figure suddenly approached Tianhai Wuji. For a moment, the whole world seemed to become a giant sword. Zhuang Huayang never showed up. Wang Tianzong, the sword emperor of Zhongzhou State, showed up in front of Tianhai Wuji. A man and a sword, standing in the air. He stood in the air, narrowed his eyes, and chuckled. "Why are you in such a hurry to leave, Mr. Tianhai? Although there aren't many scenic spots in Huading, there are wonderful places in Jinling and Lin. I'm willing to be a tour guide and accompany Mr. Tianhai and Mr. Luxing in Zhongzhou State for a few days. I just don't know if you're willing to give me face." At the same time, as far as the eyes could see, the master of Samsara Palace, who walked away silently, suddenly stopped. She turned around and looked directly at the crowd of spectators. Tianhai Wuji's heart suddenly sank, but he still looked calm on the surface. "I also want to invite you two to tour Zhongzhou State. Since you have nothing to do and don't need to go back to North America and Northern Europe in a hurry, why don't you take a rest in Zhongzhou State for a few days?" The master of Samsara Palace didn't move, but her steady voice came through the air. Her words weren't directed at anyone, but it was self-evident who she was referring to when she mentioned North America and Northern Europe. Chaos, the commander of Knights Templars, and Huan Kong, the lord of Fantasy World, who had been watching the show, changed their expressions at the same time. The two of them had never thought that they would be implicated in this matter. "Your Highness, what do you mean?" After a few seconds of silence, Chaos stepped forward and asked in a deep voice. The momentum of an invincible realm superior spread out without reservation. He stared at the master of Samsara Palace in the distance with sharp eyes, showing that he was ready to fight at all costs. One of the dominators of the dark world in Northern Europe was very tall but very thin. His head was round and big, and he had a beard. At first glance, the commander of Knights Templars looked like a deformed person, which left a deep impression on people. Huan Kong didn't change his expression, but when the master of Samsara Palace finished speaking, his whole body became illusory. His outfit was basically the same as the master of Samsara Palace's, but he was wearing a silver cloak. The cloak covered his body. It was even hard to tell whether he was a man or a woman. The silver cloak reflected a dazzling light. Under the sun, he stood there, but he gave people a feeling that he suddenly appeared and disappeared. It was so weird and unpredictable. The matter of East Island has nothing to do with fantasy world. A soft and neutral voice rang out. Huan Kong said calmly and elegantly, "Your Highness, you want to force me to stay in Zhongzhou State. Isn't that too overbearing? It's just a normal trip." The master of Samsara Palace's tone became calmer. "If you don't want to support East Island, why do you care about our little rudeness? The scenic spots of Zhongzhou State won't let you down." Huan Kong and Chaos looked at each other subconsciously. Of course, they didn't want to support East Island, but it was a good opportunity to send someone or even go to East Island to fight for territory. Now that the master of Samsara Palace forced them to stay, it was obvious what she meant. Even if they wanted to fight for territory, because they were deeply involved in Zhongzhou State, the territory they got wouldn't be good. Zhongzhou State and Samsara made it clear that they wanted to share the benefits of East Island equally. What a big appetite! Tianhai Wuji couldn't help but fly into a rage. In a few simple words, Zhongzhou State's wild ambition was exposed. In Wang Tianzong's eyes, which suddenly became sharp, the sword master of East Island suddenly pulled out his saber. The bright blade broke through the air, and a faint green appeared on the blade instantly. The air was turbulent fiercely. Tianhai Wuji held the saber with both hands, looked at Wang Tianzong in the air in front of him, and said calmly, "Get out of the way. I have to go back." "You don't give me face?" Wang Tianzong tilted his head and said indifferently, "We can't give face to His Majesty. Today, he and I have to leave the Sky Academy." In the crisp clang, Wuxia and Xianxia's figure, which had drawn his sword, slid forward for a distance in a weird way. There seemed to be a gust of wind whistling in the calm air. In front of Wuxia and Xianxia and Tianhai Wuji, a wall made of pure wind spread out. The gust of wind whistled. The wind wall stood in front of the two, and it was as lofty as a mountain in the gust of wind. "If I don't let you go, you can't go." Wang Tianzong looked down at the wind wall below and said expressionlessly. Tianhai Wuji suddenly swore in Japanese. The blade with faint green light was raised, and the whole person disappeared in an instant. His person and his saber completely dissipated in the air. Only the bright saber light tore through the air and directly enveloped Wang Tianzong. Wuxia and Xianxia's hand holding the sword shook, and the gust of wind was like a tornado. It blew directly to Wang Tianzong. In the middle of the crowd, Jiang Qinyan stepped back slightly. A calm voice with cold anger sounded, "Jiang Qinyan? There is a case in Kunlun City, and I need you to go back with me to investigate." Jiang Qinyan, who was about to leave quietly, suddenly stopped and turned slightly. In his sight, Gu Xingyun, who had changed his clothes, appeared behind Jiang Qinyan with a cold expression. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the inexplicably furious war god of Zhongzhou State in front of him. He suddenly smiled and said softly, "Your Highness war god, in your current state, can you stop me? Even if you can, I still have the legend of Qin. Shouldn't you consider the consequences? It's enough for your Highness war god to stop the second master." A rough voice rang out. In the crowd of spectators, the leader of the half-step invincible realm expert of the Dark Knights, who was originally the least valued, walked out of the crowd. "The murderous weapon, the legend of Qin, I will stop it for your Highness war god." He walked forward quickly, and a black spear at least 2 meters long appeared directly in his hand. The darkness spread. The black and somewhat weird spear body seemed to swallow everything. One of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World. The Dark Saint Spear. Jiang Qinyan's pupils suddenly contracted. There will be one more chapter in a while. Yesterday, in the reader group, he had agreed to publish 2 chapters before 12 o'clock. He even gambled his penis. As a result, when he got up today, he realized that today was the 15th day of the first lunar month. He couldn't keep his penis. Chapter 163. There was never a lack of noble guests in the barren and poor camp. This was a strange phenomenon that every veteran at the border had long been accustomed to. The whole camp had no code name, but it was clearly recorded in the military files of Xianxia State. Its level was not low, but in fact, the total number of all the personnel could not even meet the standard of an elite company. A camp of less than 100 people had been stationed at the border for more than 20 years. There was no rear, only a front line. From the map of the whole Xianxia State, the camp in front of them could be said to be the closest place to Annan State, and they could not go any further. In the plum rain season, the drizzle beat on the whole primeval forest. The rain was not heavy, but it did not seem to stop. From morning to night, there seemed to be only the sound of wind and rain left between heaven and earth. The rain wrapped the forest. The forest surrounded the camp. This camp, which had no weapons of mass destruction, no support, and even no supplies, seemed to be forgotten by the whole world in the vast curtain of rain. Looking down from the sky, the atmosphere was particularly silent and even a little sad. There were no clear rules and regulations in the camp. It was the last refuge for a group of down-and-out people. Although it was a military camp, to a certain extent, freedom and survival were the primary concerns of everyone in the camp. Training depended on self-awareness, and there was no military discipline, so naturally, there was no violation. In the remote mountains and forests, it seemed that any restriction of Xianxia State could not extend here. For these dozens of veterans, as long as the old man in the camp did not speak, even if the king came, it would not work here. The helicopter hovered and landed at a high altitude. From the angle of high altitude, everything below could be clearly seen through the curtain of rain. It was quiet in the camp. Occasionally, people in military uniforms passed by, and they looked extremely unorganized. As the helicopter descended lower and lower, the roar of the rotors was enough to alarm the whole camp. But in the loud sound, the whole camp still seemed to be in a deep sleep, and no one came out to greet them from beginning to end. Look down, what does it look like? In the cabin of the helicopter, an ordinary-looking middle-aged man asked softly. The cabin was extremely spacious, and there were very few passengers. To be exact, there were only 2 people, one standing and one sitting. The middle-aged man who was sitting casually supported his chin with his hand, looking at the camp that was constantly enlarging in his sight. His expression was calm, but his eyes gradually focused. This was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s. He was dressed in a suit and had an ordinary appearance. His hair was neatly combed, and he looked low-key yet elegant. Several military elites who were temporarily serving as waiters stood on the other side of the cabin. Their eyes occasionally moved, and their eyes were filled with awe, respect, and even fanaticism. The middle-aged man didn't have much of an imposing manner. He was gentle and calm, but he had a breadth of mind that could be easily sensed by anyone. It was broad and vast, like the starry sky. His every move was filled with hidden majesty. He looked at the campsite below without blinking. Rather than saying he was watching, it was more like he was staring. Military discipline is messy. It's a mess. There are no rules at all. How can it look like a campsite? Next to the middle-aged man stood a man of the same age. Different from the peaceful middle-aged man who seemed to be able to tolerate everything in the world, he was a standard domineering man. He was burly and had a resolute look. Dressed in a general's uniform, he looked extremely powerful. The general of Xianxia State stood next to the middle-aged man like the most loyal guard. He was talking nonsense, but there was not much anger in his tone, just a hint of disapproval. The helicopter was about to land. The general pointed to the star flag of Xianxia State hanging outside the cabin and said flatly, "Their presence here is an insult to the army and this flag." The star flag. This was the national flag of Xianxia State. In the army and at the border, it was the pride of a big country that would fly in the air every day. It was sacred, majestic, and represented the supreme glory. Insult. The ordinary-looking middle-aged man raised his eyebrows slightly, and his eyes became deeper. The scenery outside the window was getting lower as the helicopter landed. He chuckled and said softly, "Did they insult the star flag? Or did the star flag insult them?" The general's face changed, and he was speechless for a while. The middle-aged man took a deep breath and pointed to the campsite outside the cabin again. "What do they look like?" The general looked out of the window and then at the middle-aged man beside him with a blank face. They look like a group of dormant tigers. The middle-aged man said to himself, "This is their lair. Military discipline is messy. I know you advocate wolf pack tactics and pay attention to teamwork and cooperation. But what's left here is a group of tigers. The use of tactics is a reflection of the lack of strength. When the individual strength is extremely strong, the so-called rules and discipline will not make them stronger, but will add countless burdens to them. You can say that I'm wrong, and you can refute me with examples, but I stick to my opinion." His voice was low and soft, and his eyes sparkled with stubborn and persistent light. Because from this point of view, the people and things that can be cited by you can only show that they are not strong enough. The helicopter finally landed. In the campsite, a middle-aged woman who looked to be in her 40s walked over slowly. Looking at the open cabin, her expression was calm and a little numb. The middle-aged man walked out of the helicopter first, and the mighty general beside him followed him step by step. It rained in the jungle, and the rain beat on the primeval forest on the southwest border of Zhongzhou State. The heat in the campsite was slightly reduced, but it became more irritating and sultry. It seemed that even the weather was hostile to the campsite that Zhongzhou State had remembered and deliberately forgotten for many years. The moment they walked out of the cabin, the sultry and suffocating air attacked them. The middle-aged man who looked very young felt dizzy and couldn't breathe for a while. "I'm really old." The middle-aged man stood in front of the cabin door for a while, took several deep breaths in a row, and laughed at himself after adapting to the surrounding air. "You're in the prime of your life, but the environment here is really a little bad." The general supported the middle-aged man calmly and said. The man shook his head and walked out of the cabin. Outside the cabin, the middle-aged woman who had been watching all this calmly and numbly took a step forward and said lightly, "I'm Xianxia. Please follow me." "Xianxia. Xianxia." The middle-aged man didn't respond, but the general beside him suddenly reacted after silently reciting the code name twice. Although he knew where they were this time, at this moment he still couldn't recognize it and was a little surprised. The general subconsciously straightened his body and seemed to want to give a military salute. But when he raised his hand halfway, he looked at the empty epaulette of the other party and put his hand down again. After a while, the corner of his mouth twitched, and he unconsciously used honorifics. "You were the captain of Totem Squadron back then? Xianxia, Major General Xianxia? Zhongzhou Totem Squadron." In the entire special warfare system, Totem Squadron could be said to be one of the most elite special warfare agencies. For the entire Zhongzhou State, it was an extremely old agency. Now it was only an agency at the level of deputy governor, but it was not inferior to most agencies at the level of governor. The general was now one of the most powerful figures in Zhongzhou State, but when he was young he was trained in Totem Squadron and had seen Xianxia. In his memory, she was an extremely beautiful woman. After so many years, when he saw Xianxia again, the general suddenly found that what impressed him most was the shining epaulette of Major General on the woman's shoulder. Xianxia nodded with an indifferent expression. Totem Squadron. Hearing the name again after so many years, she didn't feel the slightest fluctuation in her heart. In retrospect of more than 20 years of ups and downs, the pride and glory of the past seemed to be in her last life. "Please." Xianxia led the way sideways and took the lead to go straight to the only small wooden building in the center of the camp, which was a little higher. The general took a deep breath and followed the middle-aged man to the wooden building. He looked at the face that was still as beautiful as before but had been through a lot of hardships. This place was not far from the wooden building in the center of the camp, about 100 meters away. Looking down, it was enough to see everything outside clearly. When the roar of the helicopter's rotors quieted down, Li Honghe, who had supported this special camp in Zhongzhou State for 20 years, stood in front of the door and watched the three people in his sight walk over in the rain. The middle-aged man's face gradually became clear. Li Honghe narrowed his eyes and watched calmly, but he didn't mean to go downstairs to welcome them. "Grandpa Li, is there someone else?" A voice rang out behind Li Honghe. Although it was made of wood, it was still uncomfortably damp inside the room. A young man with thick eyebrows and big eyes was meditating. When the roar of the helicopter disappeared, he also opened his eyes and stood up from the bed. The young man looked about 24 or 25 years old. He looked a little dull and not tall. But he was extremely well-proportioned and strong. He walked toward Li Honghe. There was no extraordinary momentum when he walked, but there was a very natural rhythm. This was the most talented young man in the whole camp besides Li Tianlan. He was Qingye's son. After Li Tianlan left, the young man was asked by Li Honghe to move into this wooden building and was personally guided by Li Honghe to polish his martial arts. Yes, there's a big shot. Li Honghe stood quietly with a kind and gentle smile, but there was a strange solemnity in his eyes. It seems that Tianlan is doing well in Huading. For the whole camp, Li Tianlan's development in the outside world was the most worthy of their interest. The young man's eyes lit up, and his dull expression gradually became lively. He giggled. It seems that the plan needs to be changed. Li Honghe looked at the approaching middle-aged man and the general and whispered to himself. Then he suddenly asked, Wang Xing, do you want to go out? Go help Tianlan? The young man named Wang Xing was stunned and opened his mouth subconsciously. He looked at Li Honghe dumbfoundedly and stammered, Grandpa Li, can I? Of course you can if you want to. Li Honghe laughed softly and kept his composure. After a short excitement, the young man quickly calmed down. He took a deep breath, and his eyes sparkled with the light of thinking. Less than a minute passed quickly, but Wang Xing seemed to have spoken a lot. When the middle-aged man below was about to approach the wooden building, he said softly, Grandpa Li, I'm willing to go out, but. Li Honghe raised his chin and looked at the middle-aged man below. He said softly, You will follow him into the secular world today. At the same time, Qingye appeared under the wooden building with the middle-aged man and the general in military uniform. Upstairs and downstairs. Their actual ages weren't that far apart. At the very least, the two of them stared at each other with a much smaller age gap. The middle-aged man chuckled and bowed deeply to Li Honghe upstairs. Li Huaqing greets you, Senior Li. The general's face changed and he also bowed slightly. Upstairs, Li Honghe narrowed his eyes slightly. After a moment of silence, he said calmly, Come up. He turned around and walked into the damp wooden house. The young man named Wang Xing followed him quietly and asked subconsciously with a smile, Grandpa Li, his surname is also Li. Is he really a big shot? There are many people with the surname Li. Li Honghe smiled and said, As for a big shot, well, at least now, in the whole Zhongzhou state, there is no bigger figure than him. He shook his head and seemed to be a little emotional, with a strong sense of surprise. Li Huaqing, the director of the Zhongzhou State Decision-Making Committee, the minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, the big boss of the academics. This name was extremely strange to the whole camp. But outside, in Zhongzhou State with a population of 1.5 billion, it was absolutely known to everyone. Because behind the series of prominent identities, he had an even more prominent identity. The president of Zhongzhou State, Li Huaqing. Chapter 164. No one would have thought that on the day when the whole dark world was paying attention to Zhongzhou State and the result of the final battle between the master of Samsara Palace and the god of war of Zhongzhou State, the supreme leader of Zhongzhou State would come to the border in person and come to the place where the Li family was dormant in a very covert and low-key way. Li Honghe himself was deeply surprised. But apart from the surprise, he did not show much excitement and joy. In terms of attitude, he was even a little cold and indifferent. The president came in person. The former god of war of Zhongzhou State did not even go down to greet him. He just showed his face casually and walked back to the wooden house full of humidity and stuffy air. Downstairs, the president of Zhongzhou State, who had a vast aura, slightly narrowed his eyes, and there seemed to be a flash of light in his pupils. This kind of attitude was not gentle, but it could not be said to be disgusting. Li Honghe's behavior could be regarded as a kind of casual, and it could not be clearer what it meant. For Li Huaqing, who had been psychologically prepared to get nothing, Li Honghe's attitude was a real surprise. He did not need the so-called respect and politeness, especially for people like Li Honghe. The kinder they showed, the more likely they would be to disappoint people in the end. In the past 20 years, every 2 years at most, leaders of the decision-making committee of Zhongzhou State would come here for New Year's greetings or visits. There were all kinds of reasons. Li Honghe would greet them in person every time. He would scold his treacherous son and make a self-criticism for Zhongzhou State. His attitude could be said to be impeccable. But for many years, no matter who came here, no one could get what they wanted. The respect and smiling face of this old fox, no matter how sincere and kind he was not much better. On the contrary, this kind of casual attitude was easier to get closer and liked. In the drizzle, Li Huaqing shook his clothes and walked alone to the wooden building in front of him, which was more like an observatory than a residence. He went up the stairs. His body gradually rose. Looking down from above, everything in the camp seemed to be always the same, lifeless, with a kind of sorrow after the fall of a superforce, desolate like a desperate situation. But Li Honghe changed. The corner of Li Huaqing's mouth twitched. He made an expression that no one knew what it meant. After going upstairs, he pushed open the door. In the room, a young man in his 20s was standing in front of a small desk, practicing calligraphy. The young man had thick eyebrows and big eyes. He wasn't ugly, but his overly stiff expression made him look less impressive. He held the brush in his hand tightly, his eyes focused on each stroke. Li Honghe sat opposite the young man, holding a broken porcelain bowl in his hand and drinking water in silence. When Li Huaqing walked in, the two characters under the young man's pen had gradually taken shape. He didn't say anything and just watched the young man put down the last stroke. His eyes flickered slightly. The young man's handwriting did not have the style of a master, but between the lines, there was an almost paranoid neatness. Every stroke, horizontal, vertical, vertical. Perhaps it was because the handwriting was too neat, but when the handwriting landed on the paper, it gave off an extremely strange feeling of incongruity. The two words that were originally familiar seemed to have become a little distorted in the line of sight. Freedom. Li Huaqing said it silently. In the somewhat dull atmosphere, he stared at the words in front of him for a long time, and then asked softly, "What is freedom?" Grandpa Li said, "Freedom is not to do what you want, but not to do what you don't want." Li Wangsheng looked at the middle-aged man in front of him, who had actually entered the old age. His tone was soft, and his eyes were clear and focused, like the stars that had never been stained. Li Huaqing was silent. Senior Li is really a wise man in the world. After a long time, the president of Zhongzhou State, who still looked in the prime of his life, smiled and suddenly said, "In Senior Li's view, how many people in the world have this form of freedom? Maybe I can?" Li Honghe smiled and poured water into another bowl. The food in the camp was extremely bad, but there was a water source nearby, and the water was clear and cool. Every mouthful had a strong taste of simplicity, nourishing the heart and nourishing people. Water flowed in the bowl, and Li Honghe said with a chuckle, "For example, if I don't want to go out, no one can make me go out. Whether it's the general trend or survival in the cracks, anyway, after so many years, this is the fact, right?" "It sounds right." Li Wangxing moved a chair over. Li Huaqing nodded and sat down unceremoniously. He stared at Li Honghe, who was drinking water, and continued to ask, "But after so many years, do you really think you are very free? Within a radius of 100 miles, there is no one, the worst living environment, the worst food, and the most dangerous plot." He gently patted the table and looked at Li Honghe deeply. "And the most important cemetery behind the camp, Senior Li, have you ever been free in the past 20 years? Has the Li family ever been free?" Li Honghe's movements paused, and his whole body stayed motionless like a statue for 5 minutes. He was not awakened by the wisdom, like hearing the evening drum and the morning bell. On the contrary, under Li Huaqing's gaze, his momentum became weaker and weaker. He shook his head and said lightly, "No." "Then go out." Li Huaqing suddenly waved his hand and looked at Li Honghe sincerely. "Senior Li, the times are different now, and the situation is very delicate. If you are willing to go out, there may be resistance. To put it bluntly, there may be danger, but you are a person who has experienced great storms and waves. For hundreds of years, when has the war god family ever been afraid of enemies? Compared with the life here, why not go out and fight for a better future? Oh, go out? Go out. In the slightly self-deprecating rhetorical question, the answer was really resolute. There was silence again in the hot and humid environment, which was almost suffocating. After a long while, Li Honghe shook his head and said flatly, "It's not the time yet." Li Huaqing's expression froze, and the light in his eyes suddenly surged. He took a deep breath, as if he didn't hear Li Honghe's words clearly. "You just said, it's not the time yet?" Li Honghe repeated it again. Li Huaqing's tight muscles relaxed, and he finally stretched out a sincere and happy smile. He smiled and handed Li Honghe a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep breath. He said with a smile, "I didn't expect you to say that." He really didn't expect it. When he asked how many people in the world could have freedom, the conversation had actually entered the main topic, but Li Honghe's answer made him a little uncertain. But he understood that it was not the time yet. It was an answer beyond everyone's expectations. Under normal circumstances, Li Honghe had basically begun to criticize himself, express his repentance to Zhongzhou State, and strengthen his determination to defend the border after several visits from different leaders in the past. But this time, what did Li Honghe say? It was not the time. "I didn't expect you to come, either." Li Honghe chuckled and took the initiative to poke through the window paper. "It seems that Tianlan is doing well in the Sky Academy?" Li Wangxing, who was listening to the conversation silently, suddenly brightened his eyes. "Very good. His ability to cause trouble are superb. He is now in East Island. When he comes back, the level of his East Emperor Palace will probably..." Puff! Li Honghe suddenly spat out the water he had just drunk. The word freedom written by Li Wangxing was stained with water. The ink was dizzy, and the smell of ink wafted. Li Wangxing's body shook, and he subconsciously touched the table. The scorching temperature swept over, and the water on the table and the paper all disappeared, not even a little ash was left. This was a control that was enough to make most experts in the fire-flaming realm marvel. Li Honghe didn't notice this at all. He stared at Li Huaqing and asked incredulously, "What did you say? East Emperor Palace?" "East Emperor Palace." Li Huaqing looked inexplicable and a little embarrassed. He calmly wiped the water stains on his cuffs and said with a smile, "Is there anything wrong with the name?" "No, nothing." Li Honghe also noticed his gaffe, shook his head, and said no more. Li Huaqing didn't ask more and continued, "At present, Tianlan has become a key figure in the general trend. Sai City came forward to protect him, Dongqing clan escorted him, Master of Samsara Palace went straight to Mount Dibbing for his brother-in-law, and even Gu Xingyun in the final battle of Samsara has something to do with him. If this goes on, his identity is likely to be exposed soon, but this is no longer a fatal problem. After all, even we, the academics, have bet our future on him. That's why I said the situation is different. At least, the Li family has met the conditions to re-enter the secular world." "Gu Xingyun," Li Honghe sighed softly. "This man is not so easy to deal with. Well, is the final battle between him and Master of Samsara Palace today? Did he win or lose?" "Master of Samsara Palace won, Gu," Li Huaqing subconsciously said, but then he suddenly stopped. He looked at Li Honghe in front of him, narrowed his eyes, and his expression suddenly became deep. Li Honghe was also looking at him quietly, with playfulness and a hint of warning in his eyes. He didn't ask how the academics found out Li Tianlan's identity, but this hint of warning was more powerful than his tireless inquiry. In an instant, a cold chill directly rushed into Li Huaqing's mind, making him feel a little cold all over. He quickly recalled what he had just said. He did mention the final battle between Gu Xingyun and Master of Samsara Palace, but he didn't say it was today. Li Honghe, who had rarely walked out of this camp for decades, how did he know? Li Huaqing opened his mouth and wanted to say something. But after the intense shock, he calmed down again. He smiled lightly and suppressed all the doubts in his heart. He continued to say, "Master of Samsara Palace 1. I'm not very clear about the specific situation. I just talked to Tianzong on the phone, and he just said 2 words on the phone. It was a coincidence. Li Honghe nodded with a calm expression, and it seemed that he was not surprised. Li Huaqing looked at the old man in front of him seriously. He had a lot of questions in his heart, but he couldn't ask anything. The 2 simple sentences just now had fully proved that although Li Honghe had been living in seclusion for many years, he was not really ignorant about the general trend of the outside world. This was equivalent to him warning the academics not to play any tricks in contact with Li Tianlun. But as for how Li Honghe contacted the outside world, or what arrangements he had in the outside world, the relationship between them was obviously not that serious. Vaguely, Li Huaqing could clearly feel that it would be the biggest mistake of the Special Warfare Group, the Prince Group, and even the Southeast Group to let such an old fox, who seemed to be living in seclusion but still had the ability to manipulate the general trend of the outside world quietly, lurking at the border for 20 years. Senior Li, in addition to asking you to come out of seclusion today, there is another important thing I want to ask you. Li Huaqing looked at Li Honghe's non-committal expression and continued. About 6 hours ago, Master of Samsara Palace defeated Gu Xingyun with the 24 moves of sword, the unique skill of the Li family. Samsara Palace has been developing very fast in the dark world in recent years. But this Master of Samsara Palace, what is her identity? I wonder if you can answer our questions, Senior Li? This could be regarded as a very hidden question. But the 2 sides were real allies at present, so it was not a big deal to reveal a little. At least, this question was not something that Li Huaqing and Li Honghe could not talk about. What was the relationship between Master of Samsara Palace and the Li family? Li Honghe did not even need to say too clearly about this question. As long as he gave some hints, it would be enough for Zhongzhou State to completely face up to the relationship with Samsara Palace. This was a matter of national fate. As an old man who had devoted most of his life to Zhongzhou State without reservation, Li Honghe had no reason to refuse to answer this question. The identity of Master of Samsara Palace. Chapter 165. The drizzle lingered in the long night, drifting all over Changdao. In the early morning, when the sky was just brightening, Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu walked into a fisherman's noodle restaurant on the side of the street in the drizzle that had lasted for nearly a week. It was almost July, and the weather was getting hotter and hotter. However, Changdao was near the sea, so the temperature difference between day and night was slightly big. Moreover, it was a rainy morning, so the whole air was cool. The 2 walked into the small but extremely clean noodle restaurant in silence. After ordering 2 bowls of fishball noodles, they quietly waited for breakfast to be served. Li Tianlan sat by the window, looking at the drizzle hitting the ground with a calm face. It had been nearly a week since he got rid of my Shiranui's pursuit, and he was still with Jiang Shangyu. It wasn't that he wanted him to stay, but Jiang Shangyu seemed to not want to leave at all. Under such circumstances, Li Tianlan naturally couldn't drive him away. In the face of a person who was obviously malicious or even murderous to him, he didn't care about manners. But Jiang Shangyu's murderous intent was looming, and it seemed that he still wanted to kill him. Li Tianlan knew very well that if he acted too vigilant and hurried to keep a distance from him, it would stimulate Jiang Shangyu's subtle psychology at this time, and he might even regard what he did as a sign of his guilty conscience. For such a person who was obviously powerful but was willing to be inferior to the heavenly sun for many years, he might hesitate to do something before he was sure. But once he made up his mind, nothing could stop him from moving forward. Once he decided to kill him, it would be a fight to the death. With Li Tianlan's current strength, he wouldn't be afraid of anyone. Jiang Shangyu might hesitate, but he knew very well that what he said a few days ago was true. If he fought with Jiang Shangyu would die, but he would certainly pay a great price. In such a battle, even if he could survive, he was afraid that he couldn't escape my Shiranui's pursuit. In Li Tianlan's view, it was completely stupid to fight with the so-called own people in a foreign country. It would be best if both sides could restrain their emotions. So on the premise that they both wanted to kill each other, they quietly joined forces and took action at the same time. In nearly a week, nearly 10 famous figures in Changdao were all assassinated. There was a thunder-shocking realm expert, 3 fire-flaming realm experts, a bank manager, 2 senior officials, a scholar, a gang leader, and a patriarch of a wealthy family in East Island. At this point, the hunting list in Li Tianlan's hand was nearly half complete. After Li Tianlan, Wang Xiangxiao, and Gu Hanshan, the 3 heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State, left Dongdu, Jiang Shangyu, who also got part of the second hunting list, also wiped out all his targets in Changdao. Both sides seemed to slowly realize the benefits of joint action. Given their age and strength, it was hard to find many equal opponents in the whole dark world. When 2 young men in the fire-flaming realm who had the strength to kill a thunder-shocking realm expert alone joined forces, they could almost wipe out all the people on the list. He drove straight in and swaggered off. He was swift and decisive, overbearing to the point of being unreasonable. Even the only thunder-shocking realm expert on the hunting list in this area of Changdao was killed in less than 3 minutes under the joint attack of Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu. The whole Changdao was in a state of panic. In less than a week, there were 10 battles. Jiang Shangyu would fight in every battle, but he never used his full strength. When he hid his strength and was willing to assist, Li Tianlan could kill very comfortably in any battle. And what made him feel more comfortable was Jiang Shangyu's camouflage skills. Camouflage and lurking. This was Li Tianlan's shortcoming. In the Sky Academy, he had not even taken this course, which was taught by the Enchantress. His strength could definitely make him look down on his peers, but in terms of camouflage and lurking, almost all his peers could beat him. This was almost one of the main reasons why my Shiranui could chase him from Ninghu to Changdao. Jiang Shangyu was an expert in this aspect. He was a master. Before and after each battle, the 2 of them would change their appearances and wander around every corner of the city like ghosts. The continuous murders often gave the police in Changdao a splitting headache, but no one could track the whereabouts of Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu. The 2 of them changed places almost every day. After the initial hustle and bustle, the police in Changdao seemed to be a little numb and lifeless. To be exact, the whole Changdao, the first city in the world to be bombed and rebuilt by nuclear weapons, was a little lifeless. The police were silent. Even my Shiranui seemed to be quiet after the failure that night. She seemed to have understood that she could not be a match for Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu. Recently, it seemed that even the power to search for the 2 was less. While waiting for breakfast, the 2 sat face to face, looking at the rain outside the window, thinking quietly. "Do you want to try again?" Jiang Shangyu suddenly said in a soft tone. This young man, who didn't have the title of the Heavenly Son and didn't have the inheritance of the invincible realm, but he was likely to have the potential and even strength of the Heavenly Son, was very gentle when he smiled. After getting along with him for a few days, Li Tianlan had to admit that he was a wonderful person who couldn't make people feel bad even though he knew he was up to no good. He looked at Li Tianlan and smiled sincerely. "If you want, I'm willing to accompany you to the end." "Forget it." Li Tianlan shook his head. "It doesn't make sense." In the days when the whole East Island was lifeless, Li Tianlan didn't feel safe. Instead, as each day passed, he felt more and more nervous, as if he was surrounded by danger. That was his almost innate intuition, which kept reminding him to leave this seemingly safe place as soon as possible. Changdao was lifeless and calm. But in Li Tianlan's view, the whole Changdao seemed to have become a cage. A tightly guarded cage. For 3 days in a row, after getting rid of my Shiranui and killing all the people on the hunting list, he and Jiang Shangyu had been trying to leave Changdao. For 3 days, the 2 of them tried to leave the territory from different directions and meet up with the high-end combat power led by Tribulation. They tried 6 times in a row, but they failed every time. Highways, barren hills, jungles, ducks. Tight dragnet. East Island seemed to have quietly surrounded the whole Changdao. Under the strict defense, the 2 of them suddenly found that they seemed to have been trapped in this city unconsciously. It was almost impossible to sneak out. Killing their way out was the only way. Killing their way out. It was a good idea. But it was also an untimely idea. Although Li Tianlan's current state did not affect his normal fighting, his injury was extremely serious. In his estimation, it would take at least 10 days for him to barely exert his peak strength. At that time, he would join forces with Jiang Shangyu to break out of the encirclement. That would be the best time. But everything was just as he had said. It didn't make sense. During the time when Changdao was locked up by the East Island officials, the whole territory of East Island had been in turmoil. Starting from Dongdu, Ninghu, Jubin, Jingzhong, Minjia, Wangyang, the whole East Island was in a killing frenzy like the end of the world. Every day in the media reports, the casualty rate of the important figures in East Island was rising. In the dark, there seemed to be a mysterious force appearing everywhere in East Island, sweeping the whole territory with a momentum that could sweep everything. And from the current situation, this force was most likely to converge in Changdao. Tribulation naturally didn't do it on purpose. Li Tianlan had got in touch with Bai Yuming and finally confirmed a piece of news. East Island seemed to be driving them away on purpose. In the scheme of Zhongzhou State, the first batch of elites sneaked into East Island was about 2,000 people. Including the chess pieces of Zhongzhou State lurking in East Island, there were about 2,500 people in total. And in the past week, East Island was completely crazy. It was not convenient for the officials to directly send out the army to encircle and annihilate them, but countless military superiors had quietly joined the pursuit camp. In a week, more than 400 elites of Zhongzhou State were buried in East Island. Nearly 1,000 people had been driven into Changdao by East Island's constant pursuit. At this point, the whole Zhongzhou State had no way back. Whether they were willing or not, in such a situation, everyone in Zhongzhou State had to gather in Changdao and then discuss the next battle plan, or to deal with the all-out counterattack of East Island that might come at any time. 6 days ago, the battle between the Master of Samsara Palace and the God of War of Zhongzhou State ended with the victory of the Master of Samsara Palace. The news spread all over the dark world. Along with this news, there was another more shocking news. Tianhai Wuji, the Wuji Sword Master of East Island, and Lu Xingzangquan, the Jifeng Sword Sage of East Island, teamed up to ask Wang Tianzong, the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, for advice on swordsmanship, but they were completely defeated. The two great grandmasters of East Island were sincerely convinced. They had decided to stay in Zhongzhou State temporarily and ask Wang Tianzong, the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, for advice on swordsmanship. Both of them were traveling in Zhongzhou State together. Huan Kong, the Lord of Fantasy World and Chaos, the commander of Knights Templars, regretted not meeting the Master of Samsara Palace earlier. Jiang Qinyan, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, was assisting in the investigation because he was involved in a secret case about the killing of a high-level official of Kunlun City. This was the official statement of Zhongzhou State. Humbly asking for advice, regretting not meeting earlier, drinking and chatting, not to mention how ridiculous this news was, it was an indisputable fact that the 5 invincible realm experts who went to Zhongzhou State to watch the ceremony all lost contact in Zhongzhou State. And the fight in the dark world, without official preparation, couldn't even be protested through diplomatic channels. Such official preparation also needed time and reasons. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Zhongzhou State had been famous for its eloquence since the founding of the country. When the other side found a reason to protest, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would respond, and then protest again, and then respond again. For Zhongzhou State, which had the initiative, this war of words could be played in any way it wanted. It was enough to play until the end of the East Island incident. At present, it was unknown what Knights Templars and the fantasy world would do. But the two great grandmasters of Invincible Realm were left in Zhongzhou State, and a large number of elites of Zhongzhou State went to East Island. The whole East Island had no choice. The final battle was imperative. Two great grandmasters of East Island, and countless elites and experts of the special warfare system of East Island lurking in Zhongzhou State. The more this kind of power was controlled by Zhongzhou State, the more chips Zhongzhou State had. As time went by, batch after batch of elites of Zhongzhou State entered East Island, and the whole East Island didn't even have the power to fight back in the end. So, the final battle, only by catching all the elites of Zhongzhou State who sneaked into East Island in the final battle and controlling the chips to talk with Zhongzhou State, East Island had the possibility to save the situation. Xianxia State had the power of the whole country. So did East Island now. And on its own home ground, East Island moved much faster than Xianxia State. In just a few days, it could be said that East Island had used all its power to investigate all the people lurking in Xianxia State crazily. They hunted them all the way. If they couldn't kill them, they drove them away. Obviously, it was the place that East Island had chosen for the final battle. In decades, the biggest conflict between Xianxia State and East Island in the Dark World would completely break out and come to an end here. Whether this national plot could succeed or not, the Battle of Changdao would be the most crucial point. Now the prelude had been drawn, and they only needed to wait for the result. Should I find a chance to play? In the silence, Li Tianlan suddenly opened his mouth again, as if he was mumbling to himself or asking Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu's eyes suddenly lit up, and he was about to speak. Outside the noodle house, the figure of a young man had already quietly walked in. This was a man in shabby clothes. He couldn't tell his age, and he couldn't even see his face clearly. He wore a faded top hat, a thin and dirty windbreaker, and carried a black travel bag. He slowly sat in another corner of the noodle house. In Jiang Shangyu's sight, he could only see his side face and the old red scarf around his neck that violated the current weather. In an instant, Jiang Shangyu's pupils suddenly shrank. "What's wrong?" Li Tianlan, who turned his head out of the window, glanced at Jiang Shangyu and asked casually. Jiang Shangyu had already lowered his head and lit a cigarette. When he raised his head again, his expression had completely returned to normal. "Nothing." He took a deep drag on the cigarette and said with a smile. "Indeed nothing. Anyway, it was none of his business. It was Li Tianlan who was in trouble." At this moment, Jiang Shangyu could be sure that Li Tianlan was in trouble. And deadly trouble. Chapter 166. After eating a bowl of steaming fish ball noodles, Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu went straight back to the nearby hotel. The hotel with no stars was more like a small hotel on the side of the road. It was not shabby, but very simple. The two of them booked 2 rooms and lived in seclusion and safety. Jiang Shangyu's appearance made Li Tianlan vigilant, but he had to admit that his appearance did make up for his shortcomings. It was not the shortcoming of combat power, but the insufficiency of disguise. At least Jiang Shangyu could speak Japanese fluently, which was something that Li Tianlan could not catch up with in a short time. Now Jiang Shangyu and he disguised as a pair of brothers with a similar age difference. The elder brother was more talkative, while the younger brother was mute. This disguise was not necessarily flawless, but on the one hand, their disguise time was very short. On the other hand, according to the principle of changing places every 2 or 3 days, in a short time, they did not need to worry about being exposed. The two of them walked into the lobby of the hotel one after the other. The young Japanese woman who was working at the front desk looked up at them, blushed, and greeted them in soft Japanese with a coquettish voice. Li Tianlan looked at Jiang Shangyu expressionlessly. Then he turned and walked into the elevator without saying a word. Jiang Shangyu, who looked delicate and clean, gave people a gentle but firm feeling, walked into the front desk with a smile and stood in front of the woman whose legs seemed to be a little weak. Turning the corner, Li Tianlan casually looked back. Jiang Shangyu had already put his hand into the front desk girl's overalls with a smile. The girl's face, which was not very beautiful but delicate and quiet, was a little flushed. Her charming eyes were like silk, but she looked around in panic. But her body bent slightly, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to cooperate with Jiang Shangyu's play. The two of them looked at each other. In an instant of embarrassment, Li Tianlan's figure had already walked into the elevator. It was still difficult for him to adapt to the rich and colorful life in the dark world. For nearly a week, his life was like an ascetic, meditating, eating, sleeping, and rushing. However, Jiang Shangyu's life was really colorful. In less than 3 days in this hotel, 3 women, including the landlady, who were somewhat attractive in some aspects, had entered Jiang Shangyu's room one after another. The so-called having fun every night was just like that. The girl at the front desk downstairs had screamed in Jiang Shangyu's room for half the night last night and didn't go out until dawn. Besides enjoying such a romantic life, the two of them also got some information. At least in the case that the landlady was in Jiang Shangyu's big bed, Jiang Shangyu had basically completely grasped some of the guest information in the hotel, the daily patrol pattern of the police, some rumors circulating among the people, and so on. These seemingly unimportant little details were crucial to their lurking. There was no one in the hotel who could threaten their safety. The police patrols did not detect any abnormalities. Under such circumstances, Jiang Shangyu's proposal to stay for one more day was approved by Li Tianlan. Although he thought that the reason why he stayed for one more day was that he didn't have enough fun with the landlady's plump and enchanting body. But who cared? As long as he wasn't discovered, it didn't matter. He returned to his room. Meditation. About an hour later, there was a knock on the door. Li Tianlan got up and opened the door. Outside the door, Jiang Shangyu stood at the door with a refreshed face, smiled, and gestured to the room. Li Tianlan let him in and waved his hand slightly. The air in the room suddenly began to distort, completely isolating all the sounds inside. Jiang Shangyu raised his eyebrows slightly and turned back to look at Li Tianlan. He chuckled and said, "Senior brother Li, your injury seems to be a little better." "It's not a fatal injury. The human body has the self-healing function." Li Tianlan lit a cigarette and said calmly. There was no reason for his injury not to heal quickly. A whole set of immortality potions worked perfectly on him. The huge vitality continuously supported his physical strength. The speed of his injury recovery was completely stunning. It was no exaggeration to say that every minute, his condition would be better. After a few days of peace, his injury had almost recovered by half. The Immortality series of the Wang family of Beihai is really something against the natural order. Jiang Shangyu sighed with emotion. Everyone knew why the master of Samsara Palace went straight to Mount Dibing for Li Tianlan. The Immortality series, which few people in the Wang family of Beihai had used for hundreds of years, almost every time it appeared, it meant that the Wang family of Beihai had encountered great difficulties. This precious treasure was now used on Li Tianlan. This kind of opportunity really made people jealous. He looked at Li Tianlan, shook his head, and said with a self-deprecating smile, "It seems that I don't have a chance to kill you this time." Li Tianlan took a deep look at Jiang Shangyu and didn't speak. Among the 6 groups in Zhongzhou State, the Jiang family was an important part of the Prince Group. But in recent years, it was getting closer and closer to the Special Warfare Group. Jiang Shan, the current patriarch of the Jiang family, a member of the Zhongzhou State Decision-Making Committee, and the top leader of Beijiang Province, used to be an old subordinate of Gu Xingyun. In the Prince Group, Jiang Shan had always been one of the leaders who opposed the gradual alienation from the Special Warfare Group. Not to mention the future of the Jiang family, at least now, Jiang Shangyu was the veritable #1 expert of the young generation in the Prince Group. He was a terrible figure who only exposed the exquisite bone but hid his most powerful weapon. Qin Weibai said that Jiang Shangyu had the heavenly king heart. This was definitely an extremely secretive thing, and even only Jiang Shan and Jiang Shangyu, father and son, knew about it. Li Tianlan didn't know how Qin Weibai knew about it, but he would never doubt her words. The heavenly king heart and the exquisite bone. This was simply a veritable heavenly son's qualification. But for many years, Jiang Shangyu had always been steady and steady. Among the top 10 experts of the young generation in Zhongzhou State, Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan stood side by side. Although Jiang Shangyu's ranking was prominent enough, he was in the shadow of the first 2 people. He was so low-key that no one seemed to know much about him. Not to mention other things, just in terms of his will, how many people in the young generation could match him? In terms of shrewdness, Jiang Shangyu was almost the most terrible young man Li Tianlan had ever seen. Li Tianlan might not be afraid to make an enemy of such a person. But when he thought about it, it was not very comfortable after all. What on earth is Phoenix Pavilion? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. This was the question he had been thinking about for the past few days. Jiang Shangyu wanted to kill him because of Phoenix Pavilion. To be exact, it was because of a woman in this unknown organization. Li Tianlan knew nothing about this unknown organization. Qin Weibai obviously knew something, but it was also obvious that she didn't want to say more. Li Tianlan was also a little helpless about this. Although he knew that it was unlikely to get the answer from Jiang Shangyu, he couldn't help but ask again. If there is a chance, senior brother will know. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes, and a cold, killing intent flashed in his eyes. What? Want to fight? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly, and his smile was a little cold. I know, there is no chance now. Jiang Shangyu's expression immediately returned to normal. Maybe a few days ago, when senior brother was at his weakest, I could have had a try, but I was bluffed by you at that time. These days, your injury is getting better every day. Maybe now I am no longer a match for senior brother. Li Tianlan was silent. Jiang Shangyu had the heavenly king heart that could steadily enter the invincible realm, and he had the exquisite bone. It sounded scary, but a fatal shortcoming could not be ignored. Li Tianlan himself was from the Li family. Wang Xianxia was from the Wang family of Beihai. Gu Hanshan was from Kunlun City. Each of these three places had the core unique skills that supported them to stand proudly in the dark world for hundreds of years. The 6 paths of reincarnation sword of the Wang family of Beihai was known as the strongest outbreak in the entire dark world. The 10 skills of true martial arts of Kunlun City represented the strongest domain of the invincible realm. The 24 moves of sword of the Li family had the strongest sword intent that could tear everything and break everything. What about the Jiang family? The Jiang family was also prominent now, but compared with these 3 giants that had been passed down for hundreds of years, the Jiang family had no foundation at all, especially in martial arts. They didn't even have a master of the invincible realm. For the Jiang family, Jiang Shangyu was not an inheritor, but a starting point. If he could grow up, decades later, when he entered the invincible realm and left a unique skill that could shock the world, after many, many years, maybe the Jiang family would have the opportunity to become a family force like the Wang family of Beihai. But at least for now, Jiang Shangyu of the Jiang family had a fatal shortcoming in unique skills. Jiang Shangyu seemed to have noticed this, so his martial arts progress was extremely slow, and he hadn't even reached the peak of the fire-flaming realm. The slow progress of martial arts also seemed to show that he had a solid and chilling foundation. Jiang Shangyu was so forbearing. Did he also want to imitate the ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai and create a near-eternal hegemony? Li Tianlan sighed slightly in his heart. One tried to start. The other tried to recover. From this point of view, the two really shouldn't be enemies. If Jiang Shangyu didn't die this time, maybe the news that he had the heavenly king heart would be exposed, and Jiang Shangyu himself would be in constant trouble. A thought flashed through Li Tianlan's mind subconsciously, and then he shook his head slightly. Qin Weibai had this information but kept it a secret. Obviously, there was a reason. Before she could completely see the general trend of Zhongzhou state, it might be more useful to keep this secret that Jiang Shangyu thought no one else knew in his hand. I'm curious. Seeing that Li Tianlan seemed to be distracted, Jiang Shangyu chuckled and said, I wonder how senior brother Li will compare with Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan if you recover from your injury? Li Tianlan raised his eyelids and glanced at him. He didn't speak, but subconsciously made a comparison in his heart. His current real realm was actually just the ice-condensing realm. Recently, he had been fighting and fleeing constantly, which kept his spirit in a state of tension. After a few days of meditation, he was sure that he could enter the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm in the near future. With the effect of the potion, his combat capability could be maintained at the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. With such strength, facing Wang Xingxiao, who had entered the thunder-shocking realm. In different states, there would be completely different results. In an ordinary fight, it was almost impossible for him to be Wang Xingxiao's opponent. But if they fought to the death, there would also be 2 results. First, no one could do anything to the other, and second, they would die together. As for Gu Hanshan, who had the heavenly king heart, Li Tianlan shook his head subconsciously. Gu Hanshan hadn't entered the thunder-shocking realm, but for him now, he was still an extremely difficult opponent. And Jiang Shangyu, Li Tianlan laughed at himself. He was also a character who was not easy to deal with. Maybe when he really entered the fire-flaming realm again, these opponents would be a different situation. Senior brother, you're not a match for them? Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Tianlan's expression and asked calmly. Yeah. Li Tianlan answered perfunctorily. Looking at Jiang Shangyu, he suddenly asked, Do you dare to play with me? Huh? Jiang Shangyu's eyes flashed, and he said with a smile, Senior brother, how do you want to play? Don't you think Changdao is too quiet now? Li Tianlan squinted, and his smile was complicated. I've been quiet for too long since I was a child, so I like lively places. Jiang Shangyu suddenly thought of the dazzling red scarf that he had encountered not long ago. He looked at Li Tianlan, and a trace of hot but extremely cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. Then as you wish. Chapter 167. In the evening, Li Tianlan finally got in touch with Bai Yuming again. When all the elites of Zhongzhou State who sneaked into East Island were being hunted down, this seemingly simple thing was not easy at all. Li Tianlan had only contacted Bai Yuming once during the nearly 1 week he had been hiding in Changdao. After Tianhai Wuji, Lusheng Zhangquan, and a large number of special warfare elites of East Island were trapped in Zhongzhou State, East Island took out the extremely rare high-pressure measures in recent decades. Although it seemed that this was still limited to the conflict in the Dark World, East Island, which had the home advantage, could use inexhaustible resources. Satellite monitoring, search system, intelligence force were concentrated, all the hidden cards in East Island were played, and a large number of masters of various systems entered the special warfare system to join the battle. In its own territory, if the National Will wanted to do something, basically nothing could not be done. So when Bai Yuming and others were being hunted, every time they got in touch with them, it was equal to increasing the risk of exposure for both sides. And this time, it was Bai Yuming who took the initiative to contact Li Tianlan. The phone rang when Li Tianlan was about to go out for dinner. Seeing the caller ID, Li Tianlan closed the door without hesitation and answered the phone. Tianlan. On the other end of the phone, Bai Yuming's tired voice sounded, with a trace of irrepressible irritation. How are you? Not bad. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, then opened the closed curtains and looked out of the window. It was still raining in Changdao. The rain covered the twilight, and the pedestrians hurried past on the street. It was a cold and quiet scene, nothing unusual. For the time being, I'm safe here. Well, Bai Yuming muttered, seeming to be a little hesitant. But Li Tianlan went straight to the point. He knew how precious the current call time was, so he asked directly, Sister Bai, how are you? What can I do for you here? After a short silence, Bai Yuming finally smiled unabashedly. Her voice was hoarse and tired, and Li Tianlan could even imagine how terrible the face of the young lady of the Bai family was. I'm in a bad situation here. 12 hours ago, I was separated from Yi Fengqing. Nearly 50 of the 200 elites followed me out of Jubin, and now we are about 300 kilometers away from Changdao. As for the others, the situation is not much better. East Island's local power is too strong, and many of us were separated. Tribulation is still watching Shinichi Miyamoto on Fu Peak. Our forces are too scattered now. Li Tianlan obviously frowned, and his heart sank. Bai Yuming was one of the high-level commanders who sneaked into East Island this time. But obviously her current situation couldn't represent the whole force. To put it bluntly, all the elites who sneaked into East Island had been broken up into countless small forces, and there was no whole existence. The special warfare system of East Island's special warfare system was to encircling a large number of people, and it was two completely different. And the pursuit was still going on. Li Tianlan didn't forget the dragnet around the whole Changdao. There were still many obstacles on the way for Bai Yuming and the others. The special warfare system of East Island chased them all the way, and when the elites of Zhongzhou State were chased into Changdao, how many of the 2,000 elites would be left? Sister Bai, do you have any news about Baidian and Xianxia? Li Tianlan was silent for a while, and suddenly asked again. Not yet. Bai Yuming's voice was getting lower and lower. Li Tianlan suddenly felt irritated again. In this week, he got in touch with Bai Yuming, Tribulation, and even Yi Fengqing. But Li Baitian's team of 6 people was the only one he couldn't get in touch with. Like Jiang Shangyu, Li Baitian's team was the second group of participants in the hunting operation, and they were responsible for hunting some relatively less important people on the list. Less than 12 hours after Li Tianlan left, they also left the Azure Pool Hot Spring Club. Li Beiyan, Ning Qianqing, Su Chu, Yu Qingyan, Yi Huayu, and Dongsheng Rushi who acted with them. The 6 of them had been missing for nearly a week. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the negative emotions that kept surging in his heart, and asked directly, "Sister Bai, what do you need me to do?" "I have a map here." It was exchanged by Director Han after sacrificing more than a dozen elites in Changdao. "Tenlan, everyone is in a bad situation now, and our strength is too scattered. When we finally rush into Changdao, we will face the tight encirclement outside Changdao, and we will definitely suffer heavy casualties. So we hope you can do something for Zhongzhou State. Even if we can reduce the casualties of our elites, it will be good," Bai Yuming said softly. Li Tianlan's eyes suddenly lit up. "That map, it's the current defense map of Changdao, and the strength evaluation of some related experts. Tenlan, I know you are with Jiang Shangyu. If you two act together, you can help us a lot. And we will also report this achievement to the military of Zhongzhou State and Kunlun City, and then..." "Sister Bai, you don't have to say so much." Li Tianlan took the initiative to interrupt Bai Yuming. "In fact, that's what we are going to do. It's just that we are still collecting information about the defense of Changdao. Jiang Shangyu and I were going to test the water tonight. If we have the map in your hand, it will be much more convenient for us to do things." "If that's the case, it couldn't be better." There was finally a hint of joy in Bai Yuming's voice, and then her tone became cautious. "But, Tianlan, you must remember to act according to your capabilities. Even if you can only create some slight chaos for them, it is self-evident that it will help us." Li Tianlan agreed. In fact, he didn't need Bai Yuming to say this, because he knew how valuable his life was. But in this way, once Bai Yuming and others entered Changdao, wouldn't it be exactly what East Island wanted? "Sister Bai, are we really going to use Changdao as the place of the final battle?" Li Tianlan asked in a low voice. Bai Yuming seemed to be stunned, and then she sighed slightly and said calmly, "We have no choice, just like the elites of East Island are in Huading. Changdao is the place chosen by East Island for the final battle. We have to go there even if we don't want to. Now the situation is complicated, and the direction of Changdao is the only direction where we can survive. If we don't go there, where can we go? But now we are scattered, and our resistance is very weak. East Island may have decided to kill us all on the way. But they didn't reserve too much power in Changdao, so now Changdao, which is chosen as the battlefield by East Island, is also the best way for us to escape. We have to go there even if we don't want to." She pretended to be relaxed and smiled and continued, "If this is a war, now you and Jiang Shangyu are the vanguard going deep into the enemy's rear. Tenlan, be careful." "You must be careful." Li Tianlan nodded and said yes. "Don't worry, our situation will get better soon. The Battle of Zhongzhou State has been over for a long time, and all the dark superpowers should make up their minds." Bai Yuming said again, and then hung up the phone. A few seconds later, a high-definition map was directly sent to Li Tianlan's mobile phone. Li Tianlan looked at the map silently, deep in thought. All the dark superpowers should also make up their minds? Indeed. After the Battle of Zhongzhou State ended, there was no need to hide the plot of Zhongzhou State. The 2 invincible realm superiors and a large number of elites of East Island were trapped in Zhongzhou State. Now the special warfare system of East Island was in an unprecedentedly weak state. Even some of East Island's allies might not let go of such an opportunity. Not only the Dark World, but also the allies in any field were united because of interests. It was not strange for them to turn against each other for interests. The interests didn't matter whether they were enemies or allies, as long as they were interests. When East Island was empty inside, all the superpowers took advantage of the weakness and turned the special warfare system of East Island into a chaotic dark pattern similar to that of Northern Europe. This was a good situation for all the dark superpowers. All the people in the world attacked East Island together. If that was the case, their situation would be much better. Facing the power of the whole dark world, no matter how arrogant East Island was, it had to have scruples. There was a soft knock on the door. Li Tianlan opened the door and looked at Jiang Shangyu, who was standing outside. Before he spoke, Li Tianlan nodded and signaled him to come in. Jiang Shangyu walked in with some confusion. He looked at Li Tianlan and said in confusion, "What's wrong?" "Look at this first." Li Tianlan handed over the map on his mobile phone. "I just got in touch with Sister Bai. This is the defense map of the periphery of Changdao. Let's study it and take action tonight." As he spoke, a trace of killing intent flashed in his eyes, hot and firm. The surprise flashed on Jiang Shangyu's face. He looked down at the mobile phone screen. He zoomed in and out of the map on the mobile phone and looked back and forth for nearly 10 minutes. Then he chuckled and said, "This map is very detailed. It even marks the people who need to be killed. We just need to call the names on the list. How much effort can we save?" "It's not that easy to call the names." Li Tianlan said calmly, "Look at the map first. How many superiors of the Thundershocking realm are there? Except for a few tricky ones, the rest can basically be risked." Jiang Shangyu shook his head and said calmly, "Your 24 moves of sword is unparalleled in the world. With me, we can definitely give everyone a surprise if we cooperate." Li Tianlan was about to speak, but he suddenly looked up. He narrowed his eyes slightly and stared at Jiang Shangyu in front of him. Jiang Shangyu's expression was calm, but there was a hint of playfulness in his eyes. 24 moves of sword? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. "You are indeed the successor of the Li family." Jiang Shangyu stared at Li Tianlan and said thoughtfully, "In this case, Gu Han's Han has a mortal enemy, and Wang Xingxiao's life will not be easy." Li Tianlan looked at Jiang Shangyu in silence and suddenly said, "How do you know?" "I didn't think about it before. After all, the Li family has been quiet for too long." Jiang Shangyu shook his head and said, "But the battle between the master of Samsara Palace and the governor of Kunlun City reminded the whole dark world that your relationship with Samsara is not a secret. In this way, it is reasonable to guess your identity. I think now I am not the only one who has the same guess. Other forces also have the same suspicion. It's just that I'm sure now." Li Tianlan was a little lost in thought. His heart kept sinking, and he had begun to imagine the consequences of his identity being exposed. A sharp murderous intent suddenly appeared beside him. Li Tianlan was shocked. In an instant he switched places with the shadow. When he appeared again, he was already behind Jiang Shangyu. At that moment, Jiang Shangyu had quietly taken a step forward. He was less than a meter away from the shadow. "Since you know my identity, you should know that I am a mortal enemy of Kunlun City and the so-called Phoenix Pavilion. Even if you do it for a woman in Phoenix Pavilion, it has nothing to do with me. Do you still want to kill me?" Li Tianlan frowned, but his eyes had become completely cold. "Why does it have nothing to do with me if we are mortal enemies?" Chapter 168. It was still raining in Changdao at night. The light raindrops fell to the ground in the wind. In the late night air, everything around seemed to be a little bit cooler. The mountain forest was slightly undulating in the wind and rain. Occasionally, some leaves fell with the wind. The sky was dark and gloomy. Walking in the forest at night, an indescribable sense of gloom and belonging lingered in one's heart like a shadow and never dissipated. In the grass that was covered with rainwater, a resolute figure was holding the sniper rifle in his hand with concentration. The black muzzle of the rifle poked out of the grass. His attention was completely focused as he carefully observed everything in his line of sight through the sniper scope. Position 16 is safe. In the dark, he gently wiped the rain off his face and said softly in Japanese, "Position 17 is safe." Safe. A series of silent reports came from the familiar voice. In the grass, the sniper's eyes flashed and he continued, "Be careful to hide." He reached out his hand and gently stroked the sniper rifle in his hand. His careful and gentle movement was like stroking his lover, and he couldn't let go of it. This was a sniper rifle that was rarely used in the military of East Island. It was more of a cannon than a gun. Its caliber of nearly 50 millimeters was enough to prove its terrifying power. This kind of gun, or cannon, was codenamed Holy Thunder in East Island. It could be said that it was the most powerful weapon that the special warfare system of East Island could equip its elites in batches. Holy Thunder was nearly 3 meters long and extremely heavy. It was undoubtedly a little inconvenient on the battlefield where snipers needed to move flexibly. But the heavy gun body and the great power made some sharpshooters who were confident in their marksmanship in East Island like it. Holy Thunder could only shoot 3 bullets in 5 minutes, but its superpower was enough to break the ice layer condensed by an ice-condensing realm expert with all his strength. This was a real killing weapon. But its shortcomings were as obvious as its advantages. Because of the excessive emphasis on power, Holy Thunder's shooting speed was so slow that many people couldn't accept it. All kinds of data showed that Holy Thunder's shooting speed could only reach half the speed of an ordinary sniper rifle. This speed was also fast, but it gave the opponent at least half a second to consider when dealing with an expert, which also tested the shooter's reaction speed and prediction accuracy. However, the reason why the Divine Thunder could be called a cannon was naturally not because of its ridiculously large body, but because of the Divine Thunder's lethality. The moment the bullet exploded, it could cover an area of at least 15 meters around it. Even an ordinary expert in the fire-flaming realm might be injured by a shot. In any case, this kind of gun, which had obvious advantages and disadvantages, was a real treasure in the whole of East Island. Except for the real elites, no one else could use it. He gently stroked the body of the gun and recalled the scene a few hours ago when he pulled the trigger and blew up the head of a woman 400 meters away. The ice wall was shattered by that shot, and the bullet pierced through the skull. Fresh blood and brain matter burst out together with the rain. The entire scene was filled with an extremely cold and ruthless feeling. It was said that they were elites of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. A few women, the stupid Shina Sao actually wanted to rush over to take revenge. What a joke. She seems to be a very young woman. I wonder what she tastes like. As his thoughts ran wild, another shadow flashed in the corner of his sniping scope. His attention was suddenly focused, and he looked forward through the sniper scope. In his sight, the darkness was drifting away gently. In front of him, there was nothing but the falling rain and flying leaves. Was there something wrong with his eyes? He subconsciously turned the muzzle and looked around, hesitating whether or not he should sound a warning. "Here you are," a soft, almost murmuring voice sounded gloomily in his ear, abruptly and without any warning. The sniper in the grass shivered obviously. When he was highly focused, he was suddenly frightened. His first reaction was not to sound a warning, but to scream out of instinct. A palm had already reached over and covered his mouth. The palm squeezed his mouth tightly, and a silver dagger was almost stabbed into his throat at the same time. The blade of the dagger was slightly longer, and the tip of the knife went straight through his neck. Blood sprayed, and the dagger with cold light was suddenly retracted. Bang! In less than a second, a gunshot that shook the whole mountain forest suddenly sounded. The light of the silver dagger disappeared, and the figure disappeared at the same time. The bullet whistled from another direction and landed on number 16's position like a cannonball. Within a radius of more than 10 meters, all the grass was uprooted immediately. Number 16's body, which was not completely dead, was swallowed by the fire and turned into a pile of ashes in an instant. The whole mountain forest seemed to be completely alarmed. The gunshot thought for a moment and then disappeared. There was no report, no curse, only silence, as if the Divine Thunder had accidentally gone off because it was out of control. Charge, change direction, move forward, change position. The rain all over the sky tilted forward as he moved forward. There seemed to be a sudden storm sweeping through the mountain forest, and a shadow had already approached the second sniper like a ghost. "Number 7, damn it, what are you doing?" Swoosh. Before the second sniper could finish his words, A silver light suddenly flashed, and the shining dagger had directly pierced his head. The dagger was quickly pulled out. Before the blood that sprayed upward fell to the ground, the figure that did not seem to stop at all had already approached the third sniper. The slaughter in the night was like cutting grass. "You're too slow," Li Tianlan said in a very calm tone. "Senior brother Jiang, are you a tortoise? A tortoise race with a hare? I like this story. If I were the tortoise in the story, I wouldn't mind." Puff! In his sight, the third sniper had already realized that something was wrong. He suddenly jumped out of the grass and intended to change his sniping position, but Li Tianlan's figure had already arrived in front of him. The two sides crossed each other in the darkness. In the whistling wind, the third sniper's chest suddenly sprayed a line of blood 2 or 3 meters long. Bang! In another direction, another gunshot sounded, but it instantly missed. "You're willing to be a tortoise, but I'm not interested in being a rabbit." In the calm voice, the dagger instantly turned into a double sword. The sword light lit up, and the crisscross sword intent rushed into the forest. Another sniper had just turned around, and his body was directly torn in half by the sword energy. The fourth one. Bang, bang, bang. With Li Tianlan's calm voice, at least 3 sniper rifles around him shot at him at the same time. Fire, explosion. The divine thunder kept roaring, and a deep pit was blown up within a radius of tens of meters. "The power is good, but do you want to kill me with these useless hands? Then you're bound to lose." The sword edge flashed in the air. Another head flew into the sky. The fifth. The moment the gunshot sounded, the converged sword edge suddenly shook, and the surrounding air suddenly twisted. The head in the air was crushed into a bloody mist by the twisted air before it fell to the ground. The sword intent condensed and did not disperse. Like a snow-white waterfall, it rushed over a distance of hundreds of meters in an instant. The whole mountain forest was silent for a moment. "Well, the sixth one." Li Tianlan's tone was cold. "Senior brother Jiang, you're too slow. Remember our bet. If I win, you must tell me what Phoenix Pavilion is and about my father." "I just said I would think about it." Jiang Shangyu's tone was calm. Li Tianlan smiled, but his eyes were full of cold, killing intent. Although he was curious about Phoenix Pavilion, he did not intend to deliberately investigate it. But today, Jiang Shangyu's rhetorical question almost completely messed up his mind. Phoenix Pavilion? His father's death? Was there a relationship between the two? Jiang Shangyu did not say it clearly. He seemed to be deliberately leading him to do something, but Li Tianlan had no choice. Regardless of whether what Jiang Shangyu said was true or not, at least for now, he had to take this as a clue. Now this bet was also proposed by Li Tianlan. The competition was the number and speed of killing tonight. The winner had the right to make a request to the loser, and Li Tianlan's request was to make Jiang Shangyu spit out everything about his father and Phoenix Pavilion. He did not even expect Jiang Shangyu to agree to this matter. But for some reason, Jiang Shangyu hesitated and actually agreed. Although he only said he would think about it, and although Li Tianlan noticed something wrong at that moment, since the bet could be made, he had no reason not to win. Killing. Killing as fast as possible. The seventh one. The eighth one. On the other side of the jungle, Jiang Shangyu was also moving. His speed seemed to be much slower than Li Tianlan's. In Li Tianlan's hands, when the 8th sniper fell, the 5th one was beside him. However, his expression was still calm. His gaze occasionally shifted as he observed his surroundings without batting an eyelid. Still not making a move? So cautious? Now, he should be at his fastest speed. How long do you want to observe? As he spoke, he shook his fists hard and directly smashed the head of the 6th sniper. The forest in front of them was surrounded by a main national highway into Changdao. On both sides were hillsides and forests. At the foot of the mountain, East Island had set up a temporary and obscure headquarters. About 600 East Island elites were gathered here. There were less than 50 people in the headquarters, and the rest of them were scattered into the forest, making a nearly 20-kilometer-long path in the forest. If there were really elites of Zhongzhou State breaking into Changdao here, the hundreds of snipers in the forest would definitely be the most difficult point to deal with. This was also the main goal of Jiang Shangyu and Li Tianlan tonight. In addition to the main goal, the two also wanted to try to see if they could kill Nani Xiu, the commander of this area. Nani Xiu, the captain of East Island's Hanzhou Special Warfare Brigade, held the rank of lieutenant general, was in charge of everything in the special warfare system of Hanzhou Island. His status was similar to that of the director of the Provincial Special Operations Bureau of Zhongzhou State. However, East Island only had 3 big islands, and Nani Xiu could be in charge of one of them. His status was still higher than that of dozens of directors of the Special Operations Bureau of Zhongzhou State, and his strength was naturally higher. He was an expert at the peak of the Thundershocking realm who was infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm. In the entire special warfare system of East Island, Nani Xiu could be said to be one of the well-deserved giants, whether in strength or status. In the current defense of East Island in Changdao, there were more than 10 experts of the Thundershocking realm, and Nani Xiu was definitely one of the toughest bones. Nani Xiu sat in the headquarters. It would take him at least 5 minutes to go up and down the mountain. Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu planned to kill nearly 100 snipers in the forest with 2 or 3 rounds of harassment, and then they would join forces to besiege Nani Xiu. Even if they couldn't kill him, it would be a good result to make him seriously injured. As long as this defense line was loosened, it would be much easier to break into Changdao from here in the near future. The 15th. Li Tianlan's cold voice continued to ring. The 9th sniper in front of him fell down. Jiang Shangyu casually made a secret signal on a thick tree around him. Bai Yuming actually gave them 2 tasks. The first was to hunt. Just like what they were doing now, they tried their best to disrupt the defense line of Changdao so that the elites of Zhongzhou State could break out. The second was to unite. When everyone rushed into Changdao, countless people formed small groups, and it was extremely difficult to contact each other. It was also very difficult to gather these people together again. If they couldn't gather in Changdao, so many small groups would be annihilated by the East Island officials sooner or later. The 16th. Jiang Shangyu sighed slightly and looked around. It was still quiet. He sighed softly and said to himself, "You missed the best opportunity." He took a deep breath and said softly, "Let's go." Looking at the time, Nani Xiu is probably coming. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, then said, "Gather at the predetermined place and wait for the next action." "You're leaving?" Before Nani Xiu came, in the grass less than a kilometer away from Li Tianlan, a black figure aimed at Li Tianlan through the sniper scope. He sighed slightly and said, "What a pity." The black figure lay in the grass, perfectly integrated with the darkness and the grass. He lay motionless and watched Li Tianlan's figure disappear through the sniper scope. A playful smile gradually appeared on his face. "But I've probably observed your shooting pattern, little guy. So you're going to die." In the wind and rain, he slightly pressed down the top hat on his head, and at the same time, pulled the old red scarf around his neck. 2 guns were quietly placed beside him, one long and one short. One looked ferocious, the other simple. In the entire dark world, these 2 famous guns could be said to be famous. Although they were not murderous weapons, they seemed to be not much worse than the 12 murderous weapons. It was hard to say whether these 2 guns made the Gun King of the Dark World, or the Gun King of the Dark World made these 2 guns. In the eyes of everyone in the Dark World, this man and these guns were completely one. Famous Gun Whisper. Famous Gun Grim Smile. In the darkness, the hand pulling the red scarf gently fell on the long gun. His eyes left the sniper scope, shining with calm and clear brilliance like cold stars in the night. Li Tianlan's figure had disappeared. He stood up from the bushes and followed them without batting an eyelid. In the dark world, no one knew his name. The Gun King, who could suppress a group of Thundershocking realm experts on the killer list with his superb marksmanship and 2 famous guns, was now ranked 5th on the killer list. His code name was Heavenly Calamity. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.